Welcome to Billionaire Romance Audiobooks. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It helps more than you know and is the best way to stay up to date on our latest releases. When you subscribe, you'll also get notified when we release new videos. Nanny with Benefits. A Single Dad and Nanny Romance Audiobook. By Michelle Love. Audio copyright 2023, BFA Publishing. Note: we edited this romance audiobook to comply with the YouTube content guidelines. If you want to listen to the full-length, non-edited version, you can grab a copy from Google Play Books or Kobo. Blurb.
My life was finally where I wanted it to be, or was it? The price was my family, my hometown, and my reputation, but my musical career was finally panning out. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans for my brother and me, taking me back from LA to Alpena, Michigan. I would not have gotten far without Layla Butler, my brother Micah, making no secret how he loathed me. If it wasn't for the sweet blonde and her amazing way with him, who knew where I'd be? Probably back in LA where I belonged.
Prologue. Jace.
When I was about 4 or 5, I remember telling my dad I wanted a little brother. Even then, he looked at me with hauntingly chocolate eyes and shook his head like I had asked him for both of his kidneys. "It's not in the cards, Jason," he declared in the same tone he used when I asked for another serving of ice cream for dessert. "Just not in the cards." It took me a few years to understand why he looked at me like that. The fact he and my mom were teenagers when they had me, and my request had come when he was a 21-year-old high school dropout, working for pennies as a farmhand while my mom cleaned hotel rooms in our little town of Alpena, Michigan. Reflecting back on those years, I don't remember having a need. There was always food on the table, even if it was KD 3 nights out of 7. I had my own room as well, even if it was the size of the walk-in closet at my place in Los Angeles. It actually may have been smaller. I never measured. In retrospect, having to share that space was not pleasant for anyone. 4 people in a 2-bedroom trailer wasn't exactly opulence. 3 people were bad enough. Not that I had a concept of what the high life was back then. It didn't help that I was not the most obedient child, a trait that didn't improve with maturity. I guess it took a couple of decades for the bitter memory of raising me to wear off before they tried again. Too bad my parents didn't anticipate they could possibly have a worse kid than me, especially not in their 40s. Or maybe it was better they were older. They say the older you get, the less you care. I never found that to be true. Of course, I wasn't in my 40s. Nevertheless, Micah was a bigger shithead than I ever was, even if I say so myself. I was thinking of this as I smirked at my parents. Sitting in my spot across from my younger brother, I was watching his abhorrent table manners with my peripheral vision. I would never have gotten away with that when I was his age. Dad would have given me a single backhand to the head, and I would have sat up and used my knife. Or even just the look. Whatever happened to the look? Just because we're poor, Jason, doesn't mean you have to act like an animal. Dad would chant in my ear so much I would hear it in my dreams. I guess the same rules didn't apply for Micah. There was a decided contrast in the dining room that night. Mom had gone all out again, decorating for the season, the fading white string lights and low-playing Christmas tunes in the background, the 7-foot real pine emanating an overpowering aroma as it sparkled with glass bulbs and tinsel garlands. Presents were already all over the floor, even though the 25th was 2 days away. None of that, not even the crackling wood of the fireplace in the living room, could overpower the unspoken tension looming over our small family, sucking the air from the room. "So Jason, honey," my mom Beth cooed in her soft maternal way. "How's the singing?" My half-smile quickly faded, my eyes darting toward her scowling. "My singing?" I echoed in disbelief. "How's my singing?" It never ceased to amaze me how easily disdain arose. "Watch your tone, Jason," Dad snapped without looking up from his roast beef. He was on autopilot, ready to verbally reprimand me like in childhood. Oh sure, but you can't see your youngest shoveling peas into his mouth like a zombie apocalypse is at the door, right? I'm sorry, baby, Mom sighed. Did I offend you? She sounded exhausted, no surprise. Things had gotten decidedly better for my parents, specifically after I'd moved from Michigan and pursued my career in Los Angeles. Gone was the shitty trailer in Greenhaven Community Park. I didn't know how that hunk of metal had survived as long as it had. Nowadays my parents lived in a quaint 2-story abode on the outskirts of Alpena. Dad wasn't toiling on someone else's farm, not since the app he'd developed went viral. Who knew people could make money creating apps? But Mom? She seemed tired, despite the fact she hadn't worked since Micah was born. Handling that kid was worse than cleaning toilets. Or maybe she was weary of life. My dad was a prick sometimes. Since childhood, I hadn't been able to imagine why she'd married him. This was the first time I had been home in 3 years, and it was already regretful, even though, admittedly, eating Mom's concoctions was better than I remembered. Between recording sessions, I didn't get a lot of pot roast at all. My singing is great, Mom, I grunted, tossing my fork on the table and running a hand through my baby black hair. It was getting long, but my agent Darren told me to leave it, that women loved the rock star look. Yup, her name was Darren, but in LA everyone was graced with ridiculous names, I had quickly learned. I had no idea what was their birthright and which were monikers, and had stopped asking long ago. Don't you have a song or something? Micah piped up, his mouth bursting with potatoes. Micah, Mom chided tenderly. Don't speak with your mouth full. My brother ignored her and kept his dark eyes focused on me. He looked like Dad, like us. We all had the same jet black hair and intense brown eyes. My poor Mom's recessive blonde genes didn't stand a chance. Dad had told me once that there was native blood 4 generations back or something. I'd always maintained the school of thought that we were all mixed with something after thousands of years of war, but that's another story. Well, don't you? Micah insisted, and it annoyed me. I might have been a brat, but never that rude. Meaningfully, I looked at my father, wondering if he would rein in his youngest, but he seemed oblivious. The baby really gets away with everything. I have a few songs, I retorted. My latest single is climbing the charts. I told my family about my success. Leaving Alpena had been the best decision. There was absolutely nothing for me in that one-horse town. Although I should have done it sooner. Yeah. I think one of my teachers likes your music, Micah said, turning his attention back to his meal. It stung me that my own brother didn't care if I made it huge in the music industry. Against all odds, a poor kid from nowhere, Michigan, had made his way into the daunting world of rock, and here was my punk brother, making me feel like a nobody. I shouldn't have come home, Christmas or not. I shouldn't have succumbed to my mom's wistful emails and guilt trips. They'd asked me to visit to make me feel like shit. And they'd succeeded. Again. That's wonderful, honey, Mom said, likely sensing my rising frustration. I'll have to pick up your CD. Micah and I both guffawed. CD, we chorused, exchanging a look. Mom looked embarrassed. Isn't that how we listen to music? Micah giggled, and I couldn't help but grin at her dated views, but simultaneously gave her credit for making an effort. My dad had barely uttered a coherent sentence since I'd arrived the previous day. He was still pissed about my going off on my own shortly after Micah was born, and he was not proud of my choices. I was waiting for the lid on his top to blow. So that's it, Dad said suddenly, raising his head for the first time. You'll continue to chase this juvenile fantasy? My back stiffened. There it is. It didn't take him long. Gary. Mom gave my father a warning look, but it was too late. He was there. To his credit, he probably had held out as long as he could. Fantasy. Making 6 figures a year is not a fantasy. Dad stared at me, the contempt on his face unmasked. It was hard to believe we were only 17 years apart. He was like an old man to me, even in adulthood, even at the age of 30. In LA, I had friends his age, but they were nothing like this judgmental, glowering bear that looked at me as if he'd caught me skipping class. No matter how successful I become, I'll always be the same kid to him. And what? You're going to be like Keith Richards? He insisted, disdain in his voice. Is that what you think? You'll play rock and roll until you're dead? That's ridiculous. Keith Richards will never die. He's a vampire or something. Gary. What, Beth? He's 30 years old. He's chased this stupid dream long enough. It's one thing to encourage his creativity, and quite another to guide him into homelessness. You're homeless? Micah asked, his eyes widening. Cool. Not cool, both my parents yelled in unison. I rose from the table, stealing my shaking hands. It always caught me off guard when he confronted me like that. I loathed myself for letting him getting under my skin again. That was why I'd stayed away for so long. Thanks for dinner, Mom. I coldly tossed my napkin on the table. I'm going to bed and leaving in the morning. I didn't give her a chance to respond and stormed away from the table. Jason, she cried after me. Gary. Go after him. It's Christmas. He hasn't been home in years. But it wouldn't matter what he said. Even if he apologized, he thought I was a failure. It didn't matter that I was so close to a contract with a real label. He'd scoff and ask how many times he'd heard that before. I wasn't sitting through it. I'd come too far, struggled too hard to be mocked by my own family. Falling on the bed in the guest bedroom, which had once been my room for a brief time, I stared at the ceiling and tried to steady my nerves. I'll catch the first flight back to LA and won't come back until he's dead. The thought shamed me, but before I could justify it, there was a knock at the door. I don't want to hear it. The door opened anyhow, and Micah appeared. Are you really leaving tomorrow? He asked from the threshold. He'd traded his dinner for a piece of chocolate cake, which he stabbed with a fork as he spoke. Life continued when I was gone. No one batted an eye. They just pulled out the cake. Maybe that's why they pulled out the cake, in celebration. Yep. More guilt. It wasn't Mika's fault I was angry. He might have a little snot, but he was only 6 years old and I didn't know him at all. Thanks to Dad, my brother was a stranger to me. You can come visit me in LA, I told him, softening my tone. I'm sure Mom would bring you. His eyebrows shot up as he chewed on his cake deliberately, watching me with curious eyes. It took him a long while to swallow. Why? He finally asked. Why what? There's tons to do. Why would I come and visit you? I felt heat warming my cheeks. Why not? We're brothers, you know. Micah shrugged. I guess. He stuffed another forkful of icing into his mouth. This time he didn't wait until his mouth was clear before speaking. I don't really know you. My neck was so tense it was going to snap. We could change that. We could hang out and stuff. That sounded so lame, but I didn't know how to talk to this kid. He was absolutely correct. We shared blood, but that was it. And if I don't make an effort, that's all we'll ever be, strangers who share blood. What do you say? I pressed when he didn't respond. Will you come visit? He shook his head. I don't think so, he replied, turning away. Wait. Why not? He glanced at me and sighed. Because things are heavy. You make things, I dunno, harder. He was gone, leaving me processing what he said. A full-grown man had been dismissed by a 6-year-old and reprimanded by his father. I sat up and began packing my suitcase, determined to leave tonight. I didn't need this. I was just fine in California without them. Why did I suppose having a brother was a good idea? I gritted my teeth. I called a cab and proceeded to Alpena County Regional Airport with only one phrase ringing in my mind with sheer resolve. It will be too soon if I see them again. I don't need them. And I meant it at the time.
Jace.
In the recording studio, The headphones canceled out the sounds around me as I poured my soul into the microphone, my eyes firmly closed. I was caught up in the melody flowing from my lips and into the track. It was the same when I finished a song I'd sweated over, the all-nighters perfecting the lyrics, the bickering with bandmates, self-deprecation, all worthwhile. I wasn't there. I was a lover calling back his long-gone woman, a jilted groom or a rebel, giving the finger to the establishment. I was whatever the song directed me to be. That was why I didn't realize the engineer was tapping on the glass, waving his hands and desperately trying to get my attention. The music stopped, but I never used it as a guide. It was easier to sing from the heart. Until a hand was on my shoulder, I was soloing for a full minute. It was not recorded. What the feck? I snapped. This is the best take yet. Jerome shook his shaggy blonde head apologetically. Sorry man, the sound engineer sighed. Your time is up. Axion P and his crew have the space. Indignantly, I glowered at him. It was a minute after 11. 1 damn minute. Seriously? I spat. He couldn't wait 10 minutes. He booked the space, Jerome reminded me. And you were running over time. I was incensed. The rapper was never on time for anything, including his concerts. I highly doubted that Axion was there. Jerome was just covering himself, in case the infamous hip-hop artist showed his face early. God forbid he had to wait. Sorry man, Jerome said again, and I almost believed him. You will be sorry, I thought, tossing the headphones from around my neck. One day soon, I'd be the one who made the studio staff jump for me. The following day, I had a meeting scheduled with Sony. After almost a decade of working my tail to the bone, playing shitholes in Vegas and recording in garages, at last, I was getting a record deal. I didn't bother to share this information with Jerome. That'd be right before he was informed we would no longer record with Muse Studios. It'll be worth the look on his face. Even though I'd missed the place. It had its charms, and it had been a home away from my eclectic Santa Monica home. Whatever man. Fearful of slipping the good news, I did not engage. I was known to unload data at inappropriate times. I grabbed my electric guitar and packed it, careful not to catch my fingers in the heavy casing before locking it. You can leave that, man, Jerome said, sounding alarmed when he realized I was taking it with me. You're back tomorrow, right? Maybe. I didn't bother to look at him, stalked toward the door and moved down the halls of Muse fuming. There was no sign of Axion or his crew. Such trash. You gonna punch something? A voice chirped when I jabbed the down button for the elevator. I grimaced, seeing who it was. You would know what I look like when I'm ready to clock something. The day was getting worse by the minute, and it wasn't even noon. I should have looked both ways before leaving the sound booth. Miguel was always lurking around. It's just one more reason to get the hell out of Muse. Good riddance to all you jerks. Probably, I conceded. Are you offering your face? Miguel snickered and cast a sidelong look as he approached. Thankfully, I still made him uncomfortable. I caught your vocals earlier. You're sounding really good, Jace. This album will be your best. Sony thinks so. Thanks. Damn, it was hard to be civil to that prick. The stainless steel doors opened and we stepped onto the lift. Miguel punched the lobby button as we stood in silence. It was strained, undoubtedly. Life was different in LA than the rest of the country. Things regarded as taboo to ordinary folk were commonplace behavior to Los Angelinos. Miguel, the bassist in my band, had been the first person I'd really bonded with in LA. Unfortunately for me, Teresa, my girlfriend of 6 months, had bonded with him too. Miguel had decided, for the sake of the band, that he should seek other ventures after their fling had come to light, but I saw him in the studio more often than was agreeable. There hadn't even been an apology, neither from Teresa nor Miguel, like I was overreacting and better grow thicker skin to make it in the cutthroat world I'd chosen. Who knew? Maybe they were right. They had taught me a valuable lesson about trust and how not to have any. As a result, I played nice with Miguel, but couldn't help but distrust all the other bandmates too. Who else Teresa had been with? I mean, she'd sworn it was only once and only with Miguel, but I didn't believe her, not when Miguel looked at me like he knew something I didn't. Or maybe I was paranoid. LA had a way of making people loopy. The doors slid open and I shoved past Miguel before he could move, a fleeting sense of satisfaction that I made it out first, but I realized how stupid it was to feel smug about something so petty. If you're going to feel cocky about something, feel cocky about your meeting tomorrow. Nothing can destroy that feeling. It was a crisp morning. Thanksgiving was just around the corner, and the air had a slight chill. Overhead, rain clouds slowly began to form over the valley in a depressing gray, and I idly wished I had a sweater. I grabbed my key fob and unlocked the 2014 Audi I'd bought a couple years back, my closest thing to a new car. I reminded myself I'd be getting a BMW any day, as soon as that deal was signed. Before backing out of my spot, I gazed at the studio, a steel structure with no warmth or personality. There had been 3 other studios before Muse, and were bound to be dozens after. Dozens. I am setting my sights high. Nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I peeled out of my spot like I intended to leave the place in the figurative dust, winding out of the city traffic toward my place near Palisades Park. At this hour of the morning there was not much transit, but still it was the city. My cell rang during this stop and go. I took it on my Bluetooth. "Darren," I laughed. "Talk to me." "There he is," my agent cooed through the speakers. "My rising star." That phrase made me cringe. I didn't particularly care for the reminder. I hadn't fully risen. "Are you guys ready for the meeting with Sony tomorrow?" Darren asked, and I chuckled. "Is anyone ever ready for something like that?" I replied. "Of course not." "Good. Show them your sweet humble side, Jace. They love thinking they can mold you." "You mean manipulate," I countered sardonically. "Tisk tisk, now don't be like that, Jace. This is what we've been working toward. Your bandmates are anxious. You could stand to be a little more grateful." If she could see the way my stomach was flipping, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but alas, all she saw was my cynical exterior. "I am eternally grateful for all you've done," I told her sincerely. "Sony at 9 o'clock. "Oh no," she purred, her voice filling my ears from every section of the vehicle. "I have a surprise for you. Make sure you're there at 8:30. "I don't like surprises." An image of Teresa popped into my head. "I don't care." I should have expected this from her. Darren was not a woman to be argued with, and I certainly would not fight her on something as trivial as a nice gesture. 8:30 it is. Anything else? Bring a nice pen. You'll want to remember the moment you signed the biggest deal of your life. I chortled. "All right, Darren. Toodles." She disconnected the call, leaving me grinning. We really did owe Darren a great deal. The success of our band, Rune, would have been limited to back alley bars and opener shows without her. She was a shark and well known in the industry. Being on her roster was the next best thing to being coupled with Daniel Lanois. And one day, maybe we'll be as big as you two. She instinctively knew how to boost our image, what gigs to set up for us, our name. It was because of Darren Jameson that I had gone from Jason Jensen to Jace Joyce. "I love the way it just rolls off the tongue," she'd said to me. "No matter how talented you are, Jace, and make no mistake, you are talented, it doesn't matter if your fans don't want to be bent over a table." Sometimes I thought of bending Darren over a table, but suspected she'd own me if that situation ever arose. And I was most certainly not one to be on the bottom. I steered the car into the carport and grabbed my guitar, locking the door before jogging up the front entrance. My bad mood completely diminished after speaking with Darren, even though fat drops of rain began to splatter against the pavement when I let myself in. The sun was entirely blotted out, and inside my small but awesome home, it was unusually dark for so early in the day. I flipped on a few lights before plopping onto the couch, draping my legs atop the overstuffed cushions. My cell had 6 texts, and I already knew without looking that they were from the band. The guys were deliriously happy about the future, and who could blame them? We'd arrived where we'd aspired to be. I stared at the phone for a long moment and got an overwhelming desire to call Mom. Ever since Sony had arranged for this meeting 3 weeks earlier, I'd wrestled with the same demon every time I was alone. I wanted to tell her the good news, but it wasn't to spread the joy, only so that she would tell my jerk father my childish fantasy would gross me more than he'd ever seen in his life. Perhaps that wasn't true. I wasn't sure how much Sony was offering, but it had to be substantial. It burned me that, after 4 years, I was still angry with my father, even though he'd acted as he always had, looking down on me like I wasn't worthy of the fame I'd worked so hard to reach. I hadn't spoken to him since that Christmas, and the relationship with my mom wasn't good either. When we did, she would force Micah on the phone, but those conversations were short and awkward. I tossed the cell aside before my fingers took over, without my mind agreeing. Maybe I'd wait to give Mom an actual figure on our advance before making the call. I was growing heavy-eyed. The rain always did that to me, creating a haze which made me want a nap. At first I fought it, thinking about things to do today, but then I shoved the list aside and embraced the idea of a siesta. I'd earned it. My lids barely closed before I was caught in a bizarre dream. I didn't remember a great deal, but I saw my mom shaking her head at me. She kept repeating something before pointing over my shoulder. When I turned, Micah was staring at me with a blank expression on his face. He looked older and scared. I pivoted back, but my mother was gone, and my dad was standing there. That was enough to spring me awake. At the same time, I realized it wasn't the only thing which had woken me. My cell was ringing too. A full storm had taken hold while I napped, the wind picking up, the branches of the orange trees swinging wildly against the almost black sky. "Hello," I mumbled, clearing my throat after the fact. If I'd looked at the call display, I would have seen it was a private number, not that it would have stopped me from answering it. "Jason Jensen?" I blinked several times, pulling the phone back to look at the caller. It told me nothing. It was weird to be called Jason, after legally changing my name to Jace Joyce many years ago. Nothing good would come from this call. "Who is this?" "Is this Jason Jensen?" The man sounded stern, authoritative, and my first thought was the IRS. Outside, thunder rumbled, and my jaw locked as I debated whether to tell him it was me. "This is Detective Blake Corso of the Alpena Police Department. Is this Jason Jensen?" A flash of lightning streaked the sky outside my living room window, and I froze, knowing the horrific foreshadowing that only occurred in movies. My dream came flooding back to me full force, and a sick feeling rocked my gut. This wasn't a bad movie, it was my life, no matter how much of it seemed to play in slow motion. "Yeah," I finally rasped. "This is he." "Mr. Jensen, I'm afraid I have some bad news for you." He didn't need to finish his thought. I already knew what he was going to say. One of my parents had died.
Layla.
Bad news always spreads through small towns like wildfire, and this instance was no different. Sitting in Rosalie's diner, having my morning coffee, all anyone could talk about was the horrible car accident from the night before, and I wished they would stop. It gave me shivers every time I thought about it, and it seemed that was all I could think about. "He was drunk as a skunk," Sarah Millerson sighed, pouring from a pitcher as she shook her head. "Driving the wrong way on the freeway." "It's a damn shame the driver in the semi survived," Pat Richards grunted. "That jerk should rot in hell." "I'm sure he's in his own kind of hell this morning," Sarah replied softly, shooting me a look across the counter. "Imagine waking up and learning you killed someone. That's a hangover you'll never recover from." "Killed someone?" Pat scoffed. "He did a lot more than that. He's a murdering son of a gun. I hear his room at the hospital is under guard. Our tax dollars at work, huh? Protecting a piece of crap like that." I tell you, if he wasn't guarded, I'd go down there and get my own form of justice on that jerk. You know what I mean? I wanted to scream at him to stop it, my heart thudding madly as Pat grew more incensed. Sitting back, turning my eyes away from Pat's reddening face, I bit on my lower lip. Tears were burning behind my blue eyes, but I willed myself not to cry. I knew the Jensens, had even babysat Micah a few times over the years, which made the tragedy all the more real, but my heart was just as broken for the driver of that truck, drunk or not. I couldn't imagine what that man was going through. It's easy for Pat to judge the man, but I've seen him get behind the wheel after having a six-pack or more. It could just as easily have been Pat who made that fatal mistake. Of course, these were not things I said aloud. I wasn't looking for a fight, not then and not ever. Layla Butler wasn't known for speaking her mind. I was more known for my quiet manner, a tender smile, and keeping the peace. Except there was nothing peaceful about Rosalie's this morning, and the negativity was overwhelming. More coffee, hun. Sarah appeared before me, coffee jug in her weathered hands. No. Just the check, Sarah. She nodded, casting me a final, worried gaze, and headed for the till. I grabbed my jacket from the neighboring stool and threw it over my shoulders. See you, Layla. Pat called after me, but I only waved at him without turning so he didn't see my expression. I wasn't much known for my poker face, something Sarah noticed when I stood by the register to pay. You shouldn't take these things to heart, hun, Sarah mentioned softly when I handed her a $10 bill. There is nothing you can do about it. Doesn't make it any less heartbreaking, I muttered. Keep the change. She yelled out a thank you, but I was already out the door and halfway to my Jeep. I was pushing it for time, having spent too much of my morning eavesdropping on the regulars as they talked about the accident. Accident. What a pathetic word for what happened. The whole thing could have been avoided with a little foresight. I was far too distracted to drive, and when I pulled up in the employee lot, I was glad I'd made it in one piece. I hoped the conversation at work wouldn't be the accident, but the upcoming day didn't give me a good feeling. Turned out I was right. I quickly checked my reflection in the rearview mirror and ensured my honey blonde hair was tucked under my hairnet. I wasn't wearing makeup, although I didn't need it. The freckles that had haunted me since childhood had diminished to a gentle dusting over my nose, but I had been lucky enough to keep my youthful complexion. I looked tired though, a slight darkness shadowing my usually bright eyes. It didn't matter. I had no one to impress at work. No one to impress at home either, I reminded myself dryly. Also not known for my social life. Yeah, I wasn't known for a lot of things. I pulled my keys from the ignition and started toward the side entrance. As I approached, at least 50 day shift workers were milling about, chattering amongst themselves. Some had cigarettes dangling from between their lips, while others were scowling, peering at Waxman Textiles, infuriated. What's going on? I asked one of my coworkers. Our shift starts in 5 minutes. Why is everyone out here? We're locked out, Robin grunted. What? It didn't make any sense. Most of us had worked here for years. If there was some kind of problem, we would have at least gotten an email, wouldn't we? On a whim, I pulled out my cell and checked my emails for an update, but there was nothing that indicated why we were standing around like fools. I moved toward the door and pulled on it, feeling silly when it didn't give. Obviously, it had probably been done before. What a cowardly shithead thing to do, some guy yelled. I think his name was Thomas. He looked like a Tom. Don't jump to conclusions, I said, holding up my hand. I could feel tension brewing from a mile away, and the last thing I wanted was to be in the middle of a riot, especially without all the facts. What else can it be? Tom shot back. They ain't giving us a paid vacation. Suddenly, the side door opened, and in a swarm we marched toward Brad, the day manager, a rush of inquiries filling my ears. What's going on? Are we working today or not? Is there a setback? What the hell is this? In a flash, Brad slapped a piece of paper on the door and ducked back inside. A weird silence followed his departure, and I was left dumbly staring at Robin. What does it say? Someone yelled, and again we all swept forward in a wave, craning our necks to read the notice Brad had pasted to the door. You have got to be shitting me. Tom howled. They're laying us off. Just like that. No notice, nothing. An uproar began, and I wanted to get out of there before shit started flying. I backed out from the angry mob of workers, retreated to my car, and observed from there. My heart was hammering in my chest as the gravity of what had happened struck me. I was unemployed. 1 minute, I'd had a comfortable job, a guaranteed paycheck and insurance benefits. The next, I was locked out and left for broke without so much as a handshake and good luck. Look at them, I thought grimly, watching as the workers began to pound on the entrance. What good will this do? I couldn't sit around gaping at my workplace all day, but it was like a train wreck, and I couldn't look away until my cell rang several minutes later. Hun, did you just get locked out of Waxman? My mother crooned in my voice. She sounded as stressed out as I felt. Yeah, how did you hear about it so fast? She sighed heavily. It's a small town, Layla. Jake Watts called. He's livid. He has 4 kids to support. I closed my eyes and shook my head. We weren't unionized. There was nothing we could do unless we hired a lawyer to clap back, and Waxman must have known we had no means to do that. How can we when the pay was minimal? This day is a write-off, I asserted, and Mom soundly commiserated. Come over, sweetie. I'll bake a pie. I laughed. Her solution to everything was baking or cooking. My mom was a quintessential housewife. That classification was derogatory in our ever-changing society, but she'd have said the same thing. Nothing made her happier than caring for her husband and kids, even though we were all grown and living on our own. She'd married my dad just out of high school and spent her life caring for the 4 of us, working not a single day. What was peculiar in today's world came naturally to Mom, like she was from another era. It didn't bother her in the least that other women had full-time careers. In her mind, being at home with her family was the right thing to do. All she needs is a gaggle of grandkids to spoil and she'll be content. My sister Kat was a newlywed, and my brother Ryan had recently married as well. I knew kids were in the near future. I ignored the stab of envy and refocused on what Mom had suggested. I considered her offer. My day was freed up, after all. What else could I do but go home and stress about being unemployed? And she baked a delectable pie. All right, Mom, I'll be there in 15. Outside, a real riot was breaking out, and my jaw clenched as I watched my colleagues hurling random items at the building. A part of me wanted to stop them, but the meek side of me won, as always. Conflict was not my thing, and conflict resolution was hardly my specialty. What could I possibly say to a bunch of desperate people to make them stand down anyway? Hey morons, they've got the property damage you're causing on camera. Tom, you can't break into the building with a cinder block. It was better to just opt out of here. I backed out of my space and left the lot, my eyes darting worriedly to the rearview mirror. Security joined the assembly. Thankfully, I was the hell out of there. A criminal record was not on my list of wants, my prospects were bleak enough as it was. It took me less than 15 minutes to get to my parents' place. Only after I parked in front of the perfectly manicured lawn did it dawn on me that I had defied all the speed limits, putting as much space between me and the factory as possible. My heart was still beating fast as I made my way up the flagstone. A light snow had fallen overnight, and it dusted the Thanksgiving decorations Mom had put out. A plywood turkey eyed a cornucopia filled with squash, and a huge real pumpkin sat on the front porch. Mom put a lot of effort into her decor, but it was hard to feel festive today, not when a cloud of gloom seemed to have befallen Alpina. I should have stayed in bed this morning. Wrapping the jacket around me, I stepped onto the wraparound veranda. I blamed my lethargy on the cold, but maybe I'd sensed the bleakness of the day instinctively. Too late now. I was facing whatever was in store for me. Mom must have been watching from the window, because the door flew open the second my foot hit the landing. She peered at me with worried blue eyes. "Oh, honey, she said sympathetically, extending her arms to me. Come here. Instantly, I threw myself into her arms, relishing the warmth of her bosom. My feelings shone clearly on my face, no matter how hard I tried to hide them. It's fine. I didn't separate myself from her embrace. I'll find another job. Of course you will. Carla Butler conceded firmly. You have many talents. Sometimes I wondered how she managed to lie with such a serious face. The fact was, I didn't have many talents. I'd graduated high school, but much to my dad's chagrin, I'd never attended college. You're the only one who did not go to college, he protested. Why not? Because I don't know what to do with my life, and will not waste your money on a degree I might never use. Layla, a college education is important. At least a trade school like Morris. I'm not going to be a mechanic like my brother, Dad. No, I thought with sarcasm, pissed for not listening to my father 5 years ago. Instead, I'll work a menial job and get laid off on a whim. That is a much sounder plan. Waxman had been the first and only job I'd ever had. It had been supposed to be something to guide me to where I wanted to go, but what direction was that? Even still, I had no idea. Come on, sweetie. Help me cut the apples. We untangled from one another, and I followed my mom into the kitchen. Whoa. Are you opening a pie shop? I asked, noting the pile of apples on the kitchen island. I'm making a few pies, she replied defensively. I'm taking them to the neighbors, and… To my astonishment, she bit her lower lip, blinking back some tears. It was not difficult to surmise where my heart-on-the-sleeve responses were from. Mom could cry at the drop of a hat. She could full-on sob at cat food commercials. Mom. What's wrong? I demanded, rushing to her side. Why are you crying? Oh, she uttered, waving her hand and blinking rapidly. It's just so sad. I'm making some pies for the Jensens. My back tensed and I parked on a stool at the counter, nodding slowly. I see. Because the entire topic was too painful, I did not insist but had to know, and if anyone had an answer, it was Mom. What is happening over there? She looked at me in shock, her eyes widening. You didn't hear about what happened? I did, I replied quickly. I only meant, what's happening with Micah now? My mom took her own seat, peering at me from across the counter, her mouth pulled into a fine line of regret. Well, I imagine he'll go to children's services, she sighed. That's what happens when you lose both your parents. She choked on the last words, making me shudder. I swallowed and shook my head, the now familiar sorrow filling my heart. Micah was an orphan, his parents dead from a misfortune. How much worse could it be for a kid of 10? The only thing worse was the estranged older brother re-entering Mika's life. Jace Joyce is too self-centered to return to Alpena. Micah is better off without him, isn't he?
Jace.
Most of the people at the house were strangers to me, and they certainly didn't know me, but that didn't stop the dirty looks I was getting. My parents' neighbors and friends filtered through the house, mumbling empty platitudes into my ears, but I didn't hear it. I was still in shock, stunned this had taken place. It was a drunken truck driver who hit them, Mr. Jensen. He was on the wrong side of the interstate as your father was driving. He tried to swerve, but death was instant. Fortunately, Micah was at a sleepover, make arrangements. What the cop said still flittered in and out of my subconscious. Most of it was baffling, partly because I wasn't there in mind at all. My thoughts wondered why I hadn't made amends with Dad when I'd had the chance to make things right. Why had he always been so damn stubborn? I didn't even bother to answer the door when someone rang the bell any longer. The kid who I assumed was my brother did that, although I wouldn't have recognized him on the street if I'd seen him. Micah looked nothing like the 6-year-old I'd left behind almost 4 years ago. However, he looked like the young man from my dream. The premonition stayed, hovering over me like an umbrella, and every time I closed my eyes, trying to block the outside world, it would flood back in a torrent. The kitchen my mom had loved so much was overflowing with casseroles and roasts, pies and breads. It appeared like a buffet had vomited inside. The smells of the food made me nauseous. I wished people would stop coming in, but in a town the size of Alpena, peace wasn't something easily found. They meant well, but I wished they'd do it somewhere else. Just lock the damn door. I finally snapped at Micah, my nerves stretched to their breaking point. No more people. He looked at me with blank eyes, and the expression slightly chilled me. There was no emotion in his face, nor any sadness or depression. It was like he was elsewhere, and his body moved around on autopilot. You lock the damn door, he snapped back. Even though I'd started it, his attitude jolted me. Without a word of rebuke, I rose from the chair and approached the front door, hoping to close it before another person came by offering condolences, but of course I wasn't so lucky. 2 women were coming up to the porch, and for a twisted second, I wanted to slam the door in their faces until it flashed upon me that I actually knew them. Well, I recognized her anyway. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen Layla Butler, but certainly, whenever it was, she had not looked like this. A vague recollection of a freckled-faced blonde with wide pensive eyes and slightly bucked teeth was in my mind. Braces and corrective surgery had done miracles on the lithe, tall woman in a simple white t-shirt under a long cardigan and pair of form-fitting jeans that left nothing to the imagination. Despite the inappropriateness of the situation, as she neared the door with her mother, I found myself gawking at her. Carla Butler was holding a stack of pies in her hands and froze when her eyes rested on me. "Jason," she gasped. "Why, you're here." My brow furrowed at the absurdity of the disclosure. Of course I'm here. Where else would I be? The Butler women exchanged glances, and Carla looked at me again, but Layla shifted her eyes away. I got the sense she was still checking me out peripherally, but it was tough to discern. Maybe it was just wishful thinking not to feel like such a pervert for gawking at her. I'm sorry for your loss, Jason," Carla said, holding out the pies. "I admired your mother a lot. And your father." She added Dad as an afterthought. He really had been a jerk. And now he was dead. "Thanks," I grunted, accepting the desserts. I didn't know how much the neighbors supposed we could consume, but most of it would certainly go to waste. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Yet another stupid question, but I kept studying Layla's profile. "Fine." I wished Layla looked at me, but she was distracted by something else. "Hi, Micah," she called. My brother joined me in the entrance. "Hi, Layla." There was genuine emotion in his voice, and his eyes brightened up. "Oh, look at that, he is in there." Micah pushed past me and stepped onto the porch, looking up at Layla with shining eyes. "I'm so sorry about your mom and dad," she sighed softly, stooping down to meet him at eye level. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can do for you?" As if I wasn't even there. I was beginning to take it slightly personally. After all, I'd lost my parents too. Where was her compassion for me? I hadn't been asked if I needed something. Or was I being egotistical? To my annoyance, Micah turned and looked at me, his dark eyes narrowing. Layla also peered at me for the first time with contempt. What the hell is this? Why is she looking at me like that? I haven't seen her since she was a teen. Anything she heard about me is secondhand. She is very judgmental. Deliberately, Micah turned to her again and shook his head, but the message was clear, he didn't want me there. "No," he assured. "I'm fine." Layla straightened up, and intentionally avoided eye contact, but I could tell she wanted to stare me down. As if I was somehow responsible for everything that had happened. Have I walked into an ambush? I recognized the sense of ire growing in my stomach. I felt it every time I returned to Alpena. Here I am back again, and facing everyone's scrutiny. "Do you have a cell?" Layla asked my brother, but her voice was low, as if she'd suddenly realized her mom and I had too much interest in the exchange. A red tinge touched her face. "Of course." "Get it, and I'll program my number in it." Call me anytime you need anything." I had never seen anyone move as fast as Micah in that instant, leaving me and the butler women awkwardly gaping at one another. Carla nervously cleared her throat and shot her daughter an odd look. "And Jason, of course you can call us too," Carla offered lamely, but decidedly the sentiment did not extend to me. "Sure," I grunted. "Thanks." "Have you made arrangements for the services?" Carla asked timidly. "We would like to pay our respects." I nodded. "Friday at 4 is the funeral. There's a viewing on Thursday from 3 to 7 p.m. at Chapel Rock." "We'll be there," Carla assured me. Oddly, I took comfort in knowing that, even though I sensed the near animus oozing from her. It was good to know there would be two familiar faces in the sea of angst and brimstone. Great. It was not easy to be grateful when their thoughts were clear. They didn't think I belonged there. I don't want to be here either. I'm supposed to be in LA, meeting with Sony right now, not accepting desserts and empty sentiments from strangers. Shit. Sony. As impossible as it seemed, I'd forgotten about the meeting. My cell had been off since I'd boarded the plane in LA, and I had not bothered to turn it on again when I got to Michigan. "Excuse me." Micah came running back to the door, but I brushed past him. He didn't need me. He'd made that much clear from the minute I arrived. He had more friends than me in Alpena. The flight had been a blur. The cab ride to the house and the conversations with the people did not register in my mind yet. Not a single person cared enough about me, but slowly the haze was lifting from my eyes, and I located my cell in the pocket of my jacket. I needed to touch base with Darren at the very least. The rest of the band could wait. When I turned on the phone, it exploded with texts and voicemail notifications. I barely managed to open my contacts when it rang again. It was Darren. She probably had been trying incessantly to get through. "Hey." It was the only word I could muster. She didn't give me time to create a sentence. "Hey. Hey. Is that what you're saying to me? Do you realize how much you dropped the ball? I sent a limo to your house at 8:30 this morning. A Hummer, Jace, fully stocked with a... My parents died last night." At least I knew what her surprise was. Too bad I couldn't muster the least bit of excitement. The silence which followed could have been cut with a knife. I fell back on the bed in the guest room, blankly staring at the ceiling. Out of the blue, the reality hit me like 1,000 tons of mass. "What?" Darren finally managed to say. "Jace, are you serious?" I inhaled deeply but couldn't breathe, not really. My chest hurt and I was almost in tears. Damn it. I gritted my teeth together, trying to catch my breath. "Jace, are you there?" "Yeah." The word barely managed to get out. "What happened? Where are you?" "I'm in Michigan. The funeral's in a couple days." "Christ, I am so sorry, Jace. Obviously, if I'd known, I wouldn't have gone off on you. Why didn't you call me?" The answers couldn't formulate. My mind wasn't working that way yet. "Can you do me a favor?" "Anything. Do you want me to come down there? Do you need me to make arrangements? Tell me." No. The last thing I wanted was for her to come. The next few days were inconceivable, and Darren shouldn't see me in pieces. In her presence things were purely professional, and there was no cause for her to see me unstable, no matter the circumstances. "No," I said again with less emotion. "Just tell the guys what's up. Did you go to the meeting today?" "Never mind the meeting." The answer filled me with dismay. It was enough. I'd messed the opportunity, the one we'd been busting our asses for. The guys would never forgive me. "Will you do that?" I was floating again, somewhere else, somewhere by the ceiling. I barely recognized myself, lying there on the bed. There was no semblance of the brooding rock star. Suddenly, I was a little boy who'd lost his parents, making sense of everything that was happening. "Of course I will," Darren sighed. "Are you sure you don't want me to come out there?" "I'm sure." "Okay, Jace, If there's anything you need, anything at all, I'll be in touch. My phone may be off sometimes. I won't bother you. Call anytime." I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me, and disconnected the call without saying goodbye. Remaining in my spot, looking at the white swirls on the ceiling, trying to make sense of the lot. The more I thought, the less coherent my life seemed. A knock on the door shifted my attention, and even though I didn't answer, it opened anyway. Carla Butler stood at the threshold, looking uncomfortable. "Jason?" I turned my head toward her without sitting up. I thought about telling her my name was Jace, but it wasn't worth the energy. She didn't care what my name was anyway. "Layla and I are going to stay for a while, if you don't mind. Micah has asked us." My body heaved into a vertical position. "No need for that. We've got this." "Well, you have a visitor," Carla announced. "So? People have been coming in and out all day." "No, Jason, this is someone different." Why was she being so enigmatic and not saying what she wanted to say? "Mrs. Butler, with all due respect, my headspace is not ready to play 20 questions. It's your parents' lawyer." "What?" Not that I had experience in these matters before, but it seemed an odd time to be discussing the estate, didn't it? My parents weren't even out of the morgue yet. "Now?" Carla looked at me awkwardly and lowered her eyes. "This needs to be dealt with sooner rather than later, Jason." Again, I wished she'd speak in layman's terms for my overwrought mind. She seemed to sense my chagrin, but when she spoke again, the world turned that much darker. "Custody of Micah, Jason. Your parents named you his guardian in the event of something like this."
Layla.
I wasn't happy about staying at the Jensens, but what choice did I have, really? Micah wanted us there, and the lawyer had insisted on seeing Jace. It wasn't good for the boy to be alone, even for a few minutes, not when his grief was so fresh. Jace and the attorney were downstairs in the living room, while I stayed with Micah in his room. What was Mom up to? She was probably eavesdropping on the meeting, even though she had no business. Naturally, I wasn't going to stop her. "What will happen to me now?" Micah asked unexpectedly. I zoned in. "What do you mean? Am I going to foster care?" A wave of goosebumps followed his words, and before I could stop myself, I quickly shook my head. "Oh no, Micah, of course not." Why had I said that? I had no idea what would happen. I couldn't imagine Jace would stay in Alpena and take care of him. He'd ditched his family years ago, or at least that's what I'd heard. He'd left for LA in my early teens, and the talk around town was that Jace was a lost rebel who only cared about creating songs. 4 years ago, he had been here for Christmas and never looked back. I'd lie if I said I didn't look for his music on Spotify. He had one of those voices, the kind that sent shivers down your spine when he sang. The man had talent, but talent didn't represent character. Undoubtedly. Why was he so damned handsome? It made it harder to look at him with wariness when those dark chocolate eyes bored into my soul. I sensed he was demanding my attention, forcing me to gaze at him, and it drove me crazy. It was almost impossible to resist. "Isn't it why that man is here? To take me away?" Micah insisted, and again I was dragged into the present. "No. Micah, that man is." Was, my brain corrected automatically, but I didn't say it. "That man is your parents' lawyer. He's here to talk to Jace about legal issues." Like what's going to happen with me? When did kids get so smart? Did I know what legal issues were at his age? "You didn't lose both your parents at his age," I reminded myself, and my heart swelled with sadness. "That is the #1 priority," I told him quietly. "But Micah, you have aunts and uncles, don't you?" "Not in the state." Maybe he would go live with them out of state? No matter what happened in that meeting, Jace probably wouldn't take on the care of his little brother. Or would he? How could I make that judgment? I didn't know the guy, and even though earlier I had been determined to hate him, he wasn't making it simple, even with the sullen attitude. People in pain lash out. I'm sure he's not always a grouch. Whatever happens, you'll be with people who love and care for you, I told Micah firmly. You don't need to worry. It was the best I could muster. If you say so, he grumbled without conviction. Had I made matters worse? What if he did go to foster care? He'd loathe me for lying. Knock knock, my mom called from the slightly ajar door. She was bearing a tray of milk and pie. Here, she said, lowering the silver serving dish onto Mika's dresser. I brought you something to eat. Layla, can I have a word with you? Micah seemed more fascinated by Mom's apple pie than with what was going on. I rose from my spot on the floor and followed her into the hallway. We stood at the top of the stairs. Mom's face was wrought with worry. Jason is getting custody of Micah, she said, out of Mika's earshot. It was a predictable response, after all. Although disappointed, I didn't know whether to scoff or shrug. I'd hoped for better for him. I'm surprised Beth and Gary named him Guardian, I offered. Considering how they felt about him. I'm not. Mom wanly smiled at me. There is no greater bond in the world than that of siblings, she gently explained. They share the same DNA. Who better to take care of Micah than his own brother? Like it or not, they're an extension of the same people. Although she had a point, it was hardly the reason to dump a little boy on a stranger who couldn't sit in one place. Jace doesn't know Micah. I exploded, feeling abnormally angry. Micah doesn't want to live with some misanthrope. That's what I'm saying, Mom sighed. Jason is not a stranger, even if they've been estranged. Gary and Beth knew what they were doing. You think so? My back stiffened as Jace appeared on the landing, his face crimson with anger. I hadn't even heard him coming up the stairs. Ashamed, Mom and I exchanged glances, and then examined the floor. You think leaving a 10-year-old kid with me is knowing what they're doing? Because I don't see it that way. His eyes flashed with indignation. I see it as my father slapping me in the face one last time from the grave. He thought his own father was sticking it to him, as if providing comfort and stability to Micah was some great punishment. The only comfort he's worried about is his own. That's why he's so angry. This is all quite a shock to you right now, Jason, Mom started to say, but he scoffed and threw his hands up. You don't know a thing about my life, Carla, he barked, turning his back to us. Just because you heard my parents' side doesn't mean you know the first thing about me. My name, for example. It's Jace. Jace Joyce. He bolted back down the stairs, leaving us staring at one another. A combination of pity and anger filled me. You should talk to him, Mom suggested, and I chuckled dubiously. Me? Why? I have no recommendations. I'd likely aggravate him more, if anything. And it might not even upset me. You're removed from this, Layla. He won't see you as the enemy. He's hurting right now, and he needs someone to talk to. He's not snapping because he's mad, he's snapping because he's in pain. It's the first stage of grief, dear. Go talk to him. Why had I become this person? The look in my mom's eyes left little room for argument. The man had just lost his parents and learned he was responsible for a 10-year-old. I should cut him some slack and muster up some compassion, even if I wanted to reserve it all for Micah, who deserved it more. Fine. I found Jace staring blankly out the kitchen window. He didn't see me at first, as I admired his chiseled, scruffy profile. The gray light of the afternoon was fading into evening, the days getting so much shorter. Thanksgiving was next week, and I wondered if Jace had anything to be thankful for. By the look on his face, he didn't seem to feel blessed. His jaw was locked in place, and his dark eyes were glowing with intense emotion. Why was my heart doing this? Are you going to stand there gaping at me, or did you come down here for a reason? A flush of heat touched my face. I came down to see if you were okay. The words sounded ridiculous as they met my ears. Of course he wasn't okay. Even if he was a selfish prick, he couldn't be okay under this state of affairs. Layla, I don't need a babysitter. He remembered my name. I wanted to kick myself. Who the hell cared if he remembered my name? Why was that relevant? Are you going to stay in Alpena? I decided to cut to the chase. Beating around the bush was getting me nowhere, and how could I manage small talk with him when he looked so angry, so defeated? I don't really have a choice right now, do I? He shot back. Tentatively, I made my way into the kitchen and paused across the counter. You always have a choice, I told him softly. I understand you have relatives that can be with Micah. His head jerked, and he glared at me like I was on fire. I'm not sending Micah to live with people he doesn't know. That was not the expected answer. He doesn't know you either, Jace. The expression on his face told me it was the wrong thing to say, but it was too late. If you came down here to make me feel like shit, you've succeeded, he growled, turning away from me. I'm not dumping my brother on an uncle who couldn't be bothered to send a Christmas card once in 30 years, or an aunt who has 60 cats. But thanks for noting my options. The sarcasm was thick and laced with fury. I came here to see what I can do to help. I realized I was stepping closer to him. I reached out to touch his muscled bicep through the thin red cotton long sleeve. It flattered his smoldering darkness perfectly. Jace turned his head and looked at my hand but didn't move. Slowly, his eyes moved up along my neck until they rested on my face. I was blushing but didn't know what else to do, yanked my hand away. It felt like I was being electrified by the contact. I shouldn't have touched him, but I couldn't walk away, not when I might be reaching him, if only a bit. Deliberately, his hand slipped over mine, my fingers lost beneath the wide calloused palm. I was dizzy. This is wrong on so many levels. You know how you can help? He asked in a gruff and low voice. A shiver slithered down my body as I waited for him to finish. Yes, I breathed. Tell me what to do. Abruptly, my fingers were being unpeeled from his bicep, and he tossed my hand aside with scorn. You can mind your own damn business. You and your mother. If you think you can get dirt on what's happening in this house by pretending to give a shit, you've got another thing coming. With that, he tramped out of the kitchen, leaving me gaping after him in astonishment. Humiliation flooded my face, and tears of indignation burned. I gritted my teeth together. He's a jerk. He's in pain. My nosy mom overheard everything. But don't give up on him. I snickered mirthlessly. I think he made his sentiments pretty clear, Mom. He thinks we're just being busybodies. We should leave. Layla, do you know what a wounded animal does? Mom, It lashes out when someone tries to help, and then, when it's certain no one will come for it, it dies alone. The idea of another death in the Butler family nagged me. Mom was being metaphorical, but it still made my skin crawl. If something happened to Jace, Micah would really be alone. Even though it needs help, it will push everything away to die alone. Isn't that something? Mom concluded. She seemed proud of herself for coming up with that. First of all, Jace is not a wounded animal. Secondly, I wouldn't help a wounded animal if it tried to wound me. Sure you would, Mom laughed. It's in your nature. You're a fixer, darling, just like me. In fact, you're a lot more like me than you suppose. I wished she wouldn't say stupid shit like that. I didn't like arguments, that was true, but would not put myself at risk to help some unlikable guy, pain or no pain. I thought of my coworkers rioting at the factory. I might have been able to stop them, but hadn't. And I liked them. I doubt Jace Joyce is even tolerable. I'm going home. Are you coming? You're leaving? Micah cried. I thought you would stay for a while. I forced a smile, ignoring my mom's knowing look. How long had he been standing by the kitchen wall, snooping? I racked my brain for what we chatted about. I can stay for a while longer, Micah. I was doing it to look after him. Someone had to if his brother wouldn't, right? I caught sight of movement in the dining room, but no one was there. Was Jace listening to us? Why do you care? You're here for Micah, not him. But even then, who I was kidding.
Jace.
Darren showed up for the funeral. I honestly wished she hadn't. Her presence made an impossible situation 1,000 times worse. I maintained my composure, although I probably would have even if she hadn't materialized. Losing it in front of strangers was not something I envisioned doing, no matter what the stress level was. My bandmates were still in the dark about what had happened, and even Darren didn't know I would be stuck in Alpena until I figured out how to bring Micah with me to LA. At least that was the plan. More than likely, reality was going to be much more difficult. Changing schools, dealing with the house, that was just off the top of my head. What would that entail? Los Angeles was no place to raise a kid, and candidly, how would Micah respond to getting swept away from the only life he'd ever known? Indisputably, he had friends, although I never saw one come by. Maybe he'd told them to stay away. Not like I was here often enough anyway. Under the best of circumstances, my brother barely spoke to me. He hated me, like everyone else in this town. I had no clue how to converse with him. Not much to explain a kid why I'd left. Until he was old enough and chasing his own rainbows, I guess he wouldn't understand. Or maybe he would be like father and think I'd been a self-interested fool. Micah probably would just have holed himself up in his room, playing Mario Kart all day, if it hadn't been for Layla. He went with her on errands, and she took him away from the doom and gloom of the house. When she stayed, they played board games or video games. I looked forward to Layla's visits as well. It broke up the monotony as I tried to get my thoughts mended. So many things to consider. I was a homeowner, and Mika's custodian. I still had a house and career to worry about in LA. And here I was, wasting away, taking no steps to do something productive. Truthfully, I didn't even know where to start. When she came to the house, Layla avoided me, spending all her time with Micah, but I stole glimpses of her whenever possible. It was still difficult to reconcile that she was the same girl I vaguely remembered from youth. The way I'd treated her the day after my parents died was shameful, but apologies weren't my forte. The entire thing could be forgotten, but she wouldn't even meet my eyes. "How are you holding up?" my agent asked after the service. My parents had been laid to rest in Chestnut Field Cemetery, on the outskirts of Alpena. I couldn't believe how many people showed up. My parents had been greatly respected, and a spark of pride touched me learning of everything they'd done for Alpena, stuff I'd had no idea about. It also made me feel like shit. They had been so appreciated in Alpena. Mom's volunteer work at the hospital, my dad's endless donations to charity. "I'm all right," I lied to Darren, making my way back to the hired limo to take Micah and me to the graveyard. He was already in the car, and I moved slowly, knowing he was crying. I didn't want to interrupt his grief. It had finally hit him, and he couldn't keep it together. He screamed at me to leave him alone before retreating into the car. He's so much like father, so much like me. He wants no one to see him in pain. That might not be a good thing, but I was at a loss on how to handle it. I knew music, not parenting. What to do with a little brother who was determined to hate me. "I spoke with the band," Darren remarked as we paused outside the limo. "They send their condolences and want you to call when you're up for it." "I'm up for it. I just have a lot going on." Darren smiled thinly. "You know what I mean, Jace. They will not hassle you, but would like to hear from you. They want to know how long their careers are going to be stalled by this." I didn't bother to voice my understanding. It wasn't Darren's fault or any of the guys. No one could have foreseen this. Calling them was one more thing to do on my list, but it was near the bottom. Thank them for the wreath they sent. I'll call them soon. Darren pensively observed me with her wise gray eyes. "So you're planning on being here for a while?" "I don't know." My nerves were far too stretched to make any decisions. "Christ, Darren, my parents aren't even in the ground yet. Some lawyers want to slap civil suits on the semi-driver. I have neighbors offering their unsolicited advice. A kid to worry about. Darren reached out and clutched my arm. My outburst was boisterous. It had been unintentional. I am not pressuring you, she interjected. I am trying to lend a hand. The meeting with Sony. My heart stopped. I clenched my teeth together, expecting what she would say. I know, I sighed. It was a bust. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. All the same, I was grateful she didn't rub it in. As he saw us approaching, the chauffeur hurried around to open the door, but Darren did not let go of my arm. Jace, we are here for you, all right? I know you like to do things on your own, but you don't have to. I wasn't listening, because Micah wasn't alone in the limo. Layla was inside, cradling my brother in her arms. Micah was asleep, his face streaked with tears. Something welled in my chest as I stared at them, the sweetness of it pierced me. Layla's blue eyes clouded when she saw Darren clinging to my arm. Her full lips twitched and she lifted her index finger to her mouth, indicating to be quiet, before returning her hand to caress Mika's dark waves. I'll be in touch. My eyes were still fixed on Layla as I climbed inside. The driver softly closed the door so as not to wake Micah. He didn't stir. Your girlfriend? Layla asked with a note of scorn in her voice. My agent. A look of sheepishness crossed over her face, but she didn't look into my eyes. He cried himself to sleep, she whispered. He needed it. I nodded, but couldn't tear my eyes away from her. She was so natural with Micah, so tender. She knew how to handle him. The residence, Mr. Jensen? The driver asked quietly. I shook my head. Can you drive around for a while? I don't want to wake my brother. That was only half of it, really. I really wanted the time with Layla. I was seeing her in a completely different light. Maybe she wasn't a nosy neighbor criticizing me, but someone on my side. It was a foreign feeling, and not one I easily embraced. My mom's sister, Helen, and my dad's brother, Fred, were staying at the house so they could greet everyone coming to the reception. No need for Micah and me to hurry back. How are you able to visit every day? I asked. Don't you work? I shouldn't have said it like that. My diplomacy skills sucked. Layla frowned but shook her head. I just got laid off from Waxman. My brow furrowed. I'd heard something about that. The textile plant had locked out hundreds of employees without notice. Right before the holidays. Classy. How long had you worked there? 5 years. Layla Butler did not seem like someone working in a factory. She appeared overly exquisite. That sucks. Yeah. She chuckled. A minute of awkward silence ensued. Any thoughts on what you'll do for work now? She eyed me, her fingers lacing through Mika's hair. For a weird second, I got jealous of my baby brother, wishing to lay my head in her lap and let her do the same to me. What would she do if I tried? Probably slap me. I'm searching. It's always tough to find work during the holidays. Her tone confirmed the job market in Alpena was not good. As the vehicle moved smoothly along the road, my mind was formulating a plan as I gazed at Layla's face. She called me on it. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm just thinking. Can you think without scanning me? I grinned and sat back in the seat. So what about you? She asked when I didn't speak again. What are you going to do with your livelihood? My grin faded instantly. That's a matter for another day, I shrugged. Your songs are really good. I was taken aback. You listen to my songs? Humiliation colored her face and she shrugged again, turning her head so I wouldn't see the blush on her cheeks. I heard a couple. She was so full of surprises, wasn't she? It's been a long road, but... I trailed off, feeling a pang of regret as I thought about the Sony deal going to hell. But what? You're on the radio. I heard you. I couldn't help but smile. There's more to it than getting your music on the air. Although that is a great step in the right direction. I don't know much about the music industry, Layla confessed, flushing a deeper shade of red. Most people don't unless they're trying to make a name for themselves for many years. Her head tilted slightly and she peered at me. Is it everything you thought it would be? I couldn't help but feel she was making a dig at me somehow. It's my dream, I answered curtly. I'm doing what I love, so yeah, it kind of is. Do you miss being here? How could I explain? There was a lot of guilt over what had happened. That I could have been a better son and brother. Like everyone else, she was under the impression I was narcissistic and had left my family without a second thought. It wouldn't matter what I said. No. At least that part was true. Not the small-town gossip and everyone knowing everyone else's business. Although sometimes LA could be just as small. Layla didn't respond to my blunt denial, but she appeared put off by it. So what if she is? I'm not trying to impress her. Snow started falling again. That was another thing I didn't miss about Michigan, all the damned snow. The gaudy Thanksgiving decorations lining the residential streets seemed much better here, among the falling white flakes, than under the palm trees. A twinge of nostalgia touched me, and I exhaled deeply. Jace. Layla's bright blue eyes were shining with compassion. Yes. I'd be glad to help with Micah if you need it. That was when it struck me. She needed a job, and my sullen brother needed a companion. Maybe we could work out a deal. I was certainly in a place financially to hire her. Micah liked Layla more than he liked me. Do you want a job? A soft expression froze on her face. A job, she echoed. What kind of job? Why was she looking at me like she was wary again? Could you help take care of Micah? Her shoulders visibly sagged with relief. I wondered what she was thinking. I don't need to be paid for that, she giggled. It's no problem keeping him entertained. I shook my head. No, you don't understand. I want you to take care of him full-time when he's not in school. Pick him up and drop him off. Do you drive? She nodded, but her brow creased. Maybe help me out around the house. I might have to go back to LA, so you'd stay with him. Can you cook? Yes. You'd be helping me out a lot, and the kid loves you. Okay. She didn't sound convinced. What's wrong? I'll pay you whatever you think is fair. It will take a lot of weight from my shoulders, not having to worry about what Micah is up to. It's not that. I waited, and she exhaled in a rush. Are you asking me to move in with you guys? Now that I hadn't thought of, but why not? We had the room, and it would probably take the pressure off having Layla as a mediator. Yeah, I guess I am. Will that be a problem? She shook her shoulder-length blonde mane. Not at all. When do I start?
Layla.
Mom was not impressed with my decision, but it was too late to back out by the time she knew about it. He's got a reputation, Layla. He's a ladies' man. Trust me, Mom. He's looking at me as a glorified babysitter. Make sure it's Micah you're sitting, not Jason. Jace. What? His name is Jace Joyce, not Jason Jensen. Mom didn't even know how to respond to that, but she gaped at me, speechless. I was on a month-to-month lease for my apartment and gave it up without much thought. It wasn't fancy, and I wasn't overly attached to it after all. It had just been my first place to call home. And now I have another place to call home. The Jensen's house was immaculate. Beth, like my mom, had taken great pride in her dwelling, and between the well-maintained lawns and spotless kitchen, I didn't have a lot of upkeep. The room that Jace had given me was twice the size of my apartment, and the bathroom was directly across the hall, although I was sharing it with Micah. True to his word, the pay was good, honestly more than my wages at the factory. Plus the style was casual and no hairnet. What else could I ask for? The only complaint I had wasn't really a grievance at all. I was growing increasingly attracted to Jace, the more time we spent together. And we spent a lot of time together. Even though he claimed he was sorting out his personal affairs, I rarely saw him do more than patter around the house and pick up the guitar. He was still grieving over his parents, even though he obviously didn't want me to know that. In fact, he kept Micah and me at a fair distance, but the three of us always sat down to dinner. The Thursday I moved in was Thanksgiving, and Mom asked me to come to the house, but I declined for the first time ever. I'm going to make dinner for Jace and Micah. They could use some balance around here. Well, they can come too. Mom protested, but I turned it down. It was exciting to make a turkey and all the fixings for the first time. I'd watched Mom do it enough times over the years, certainly I could handle it. The football game was playing in the living room, and for once both the men were there together. Every once in a while, I'd hear them yell at the TV and it made me smile. At first, when Jace had suggested I move here, I'd thought, like my mom, that he had other things on his mind. To his credit, Jace was never inappropriate. He never leered at me or made me uncomfortable like some men. Maybe all the stories I'd heard about him before he left Alpena had been embellished. To me, he was a brooding man. But he wasn't a pig, even when he looked at me wistfully from time to time. No way that'll happen. I peered into the oven. Hours more for the bird, but everything was exactly on schedule. Layla, Fergus is here. Can I go out on my bike? Micah yelled to me. So much for the idyllic moment between the brothers. Are you sure, Micah? I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. I shot Jace a nervous look, but he didn't meet my eyes. He seemed upset that Micah was ready to do something else. He already was slipping his shoes on at the door. You could ask me, Jace snarled, but Micah ignored him, his dark eyes fixed on me. Please, Layla. Dinner's not ready for a while, right? I looked out the window and saw the sun poking through the clouds, melting the existing snow in the neighborhood. Be careful and be back soon. He anticipated my response, barreling out the door after his gangly friend, who waited on the steps. Jace gave me a sideways glance as I stood there helplessly, feeling like I'd enabled the ruination of Thanksgiving. Do you want a beer or something? I offered weakly. He shrugged and I took it as a yes. When I returned from the kitchen, he looked at me fully. Where's yours? I laughed shortly. Oh, I don't drink, I replied. But you go ahead. A half smile formed on his lips, and it gave me a slight feeling of apprehension. You don't drink, you don't yell, you don't cuss. You're kind of a goody two-shoes, aren't you? My shoulders rose inadvertently. He was mocking me. You say it like it's a bad thing. I think I'm a good person. He scoffed and took a swig of his beer. Will you sit or just stand there staring at me with those judgmental eyes? What was he talking about? If anything, I felt bad for him. I wasn't looking at him like that. He has a heavy chip on his shoulder. I perched on the edge of the couch and pretended to watch the flat screen. I didn't know much about football. He'll despise me forever. My head jerked toward the opposite end of the sofa where he was sitting. He doesn't hate you. He's overwhelmed, Jace. It'll take time for him to get over this. I'd hate me too, he continued. I would have come back to visit, but my dad... He sighed so heavily it made my heart break. I don't know why people can't let one another live their lives, you know? Parents think they know what's best for us. That's why I moved out. My dad wouldn't get off my back about college. He glanced at me. You defied your parents? I'm shocked. He was sarcastic, but the tone was almost admiring. I didn't know what to do with my life, and I wasn't going to throw money away on college if I had no idea. Seems fair. Charlie didn't take it so well. I'm the only one in the family that didn't go to college, well, except for Mom. At least you knew your passion. I still have no idea. Jace took another big sip of beer, almost downing half of it. You'll find your thing, he said after it went down. You're young. 23 didn't seem so young to me, not when Mom had already been married by my age, with 2 kids.
Jace.
Was it a bad idea to sleep with Layla? Of course. Did I regret it? Not for a second. Maybe she had been tantalizing me from the moment I saw her climbing the walkway with her mother. Perhaps it was seeing how she was with Micah which overrode my nagging conscience and said I needed to have her. She wouldn't look at me as she laid out the meal she'd labored over. It left me feeling like I'd done something wrong. "Are you guys fighting?" Micah asked when we sat at the table. The turkey looked mouth-watering and I was starving. "No," we answered in unison, but Layla still wouldn't look at me. Why is she getting weird over this? I was lying to myself. What had happened between us had been more than an act. It had been born from a need we both had, a need to be a part of someone else. It pissed me off. "It seems like you guys are fighting," Micah sighed, reaching for the potatoes. "Are you going to cut the turkey?" I rose to take the carving knife from Layla's hands, and she looked at me, bewildered. "I know how to carve a turkey, Layla. Sit down and eat." She didn't argue. At least she looked at me again. We'd barely managed to get our clothes on before Micah returned. "You sure can cook, Layla," Micah professed, taking a bite of gravy-soaked bread. "I hope you never leave." The words hung in the air like stale cigarette smoke, and I felt guilty. Why was there always so much damned guilt? "How are the yams?" Layla asked, apparently as uncomfortable as I. Micah couldn't fathom what his words meant to us, obviously. "This is excellent, Layla," I offered, giving her a warm smile. "I had no idea you were such a Martha Stewart." She blushed and shyly looked away. Strangely, my heart skipped a beat at the bashful expression on her face. "It's my first time," she explained, and her face turned even more crimson. She began to sputter. I mean, this is my first time cooking a turkey," she choked, and again her eyes peeled away from mine. I was confused. What else could she have meant? "I'm ready to eat turkey sandwiches for the next month," Micah declared as I continued to work at the bird. My brother was smiling for the first time in a week. Bringing Layla here was the smartest move I made. She's good for Micah. She was good for me too. I feel less embittered in Layla's presence. Her good nature emanated infectiously through me. Sure, I still clung to the hurt and shame I carried, but was it as bad as when I'd first come back? I didn't think so. I finished cutting and dove into my plate eagerly. Micah wasn't kidding. It was decadent, and for a minute I had to stop. The memory of Mom hit me so strongly, a sob filled my throat. "Jace." I was on my feet, bolting from the table before the tear became obvious. What the hell was wrong with me? I fell against the door of the master suite, my parents' suite, and broke down, the memory overwhelming me. I had been suppressing all my feelings for so long, they'd come to a head. "Jace." Layla was knocking on the door. I wanted to tell her to go away. Instead, I let her inside and she saw me, blubbering like a kid. She didn't say a word but opened her arms and I fell into them, choking my tears. "I was such a shitty son," I uttered, finally catching my breath. "I always thought I would show them, you know? When I made it big. I'd buy them a house and say I told them so." "They were proud of you," she told me. I chuckled and remained in her arms. The tears were subsiding. "They did their best for me, and I slapped them in the face by leaving." "You didn't leave them, Jace, you followed your dream. There's a difference. It's not like you abandoned them in their time of need. You had every right to pursue your dream." I studied her face, hastily wiping the tears from my cheeks. "Do you really believe that? Because no one else around here does." She returned my gaze and smiled softly. "I'm not everyone else around here." No, she wasn't. She wasn't like anyone else around anywhere. "Things have changed," she continued, and we fell apart, but I kept my eyes trained on her as she spoke. "And you're here now when it counts. You're here for your brother." Her words were meant to make me feel better, but they didn't. They were ominous because they were true. I was here, but for how long? My long-term plan was not to stay in Alpena. Layla didn't know that, and I wasn't about to tell her, not right now anyway. She was still just here to help Micah, right? Right. Yeah, I could lie to myself any way I wanted. I had strong feelings for Layla. The longer we lived under the same roof, the worse things were going to become when it was time to say goodbye. Unless you take her with you to LA. Wow. I really was getting ahead of myself. Come on, I said crustily, turning my head like I was worried she might see what I was thinking by looking at my face. I ruined your awesome dinner. Are you sure you don't need a few more minutes? No, I insisted, opening the door. Micah is finally some semblance of cheerful, and I won't mess that up any more than I already have. I didn't wait for her to reply before stalking down the hall and down the stairs. I couldn't think too far ahead, not right now. Things would play out the way they were meant to, just like always. I had to have faith in that. Micah didn't mention my abrupt departure, and we finished our dinner without further incident. Layla had made an incredible pumpkin pie, and I ate half of it, fighting with Micah over the last piece. I made another one, she laughed. There's plenty for everyone, boys. After supper, I helped Layla with the dishes even though she tried to get me to relax. If I sit on the couch, I'm going to fall asleep, I warned her. Let me help you with this. It's the least I can do for the meal you made for us. It was my pleasure. She meant it, and again I was struck at how, I don't know, old school she was. I lived in a world where women cared about their looks and what guy drove the nicest car. Layla didn't even care that I was on the brink of signing with Sony. She rarely brought up my life in LA. I don't remember what we chatted about as I loaded the dishwasher and she scrubbed the pots by hand, but I recall how comfortable it was, like we'd done these domestic chores 1,000 times before. It was hard to imagine I would ever be at ease in such a situation, but somehow I was, until my cell rang. Hello. Dude, really? I tensed, wiping my hands on a tea towel and turning away from Layla's curious look. Hey, Johnny. I've been meaning to call you, man. Things have been hectic around here. Yeah, I know. The band's bassist paused and inhaled. I'm really sorry about your folks. Thanks. I got the wreath. I asked Darren to thank you guys. Yeah, she did, Johnny replied quickly. I get that you're overwhelmed over there. I hear you've got custody of your brother too. Yeah. Johnny paused, and I could tell something was on his mind. Well, hey, happy Thanksgiving. I supplied, hoping to move the conversation along. I eyed Layla, who was still busy, but she was listening. Not like I was quiet anyway, and if I wanted privacy, I could have gone elsewhere. Truthfully, I wanted to get back to the idyllic, almost leave it to beaver moment I had been sharing with Layla. Happy Thanksgiving. We want to work on some stuff without you, Johnny blurted out. What does that mean? I asked, dumbfounded by his statement. What stuff? We're thinking about going on our own, without you, Jace. I felt a weird tingling in my limbs, and I stood silent for a minute. It's nothing personal, man, Johnny continued. That was a lie. It was very personal. They were pissed I'd lost the Sony deal. And I was livid that they were upset. Like I'd had control over the matter. Jace, say something. How long have you guys been planning a coup? I rasped, finally finding my voice. Is this your way of kicking me when I'm down? It's not like that, Johnny protested. We just feel like, given your situation, well, you don't really know what's going to happen, and why don't you let me tell you how I'm going to handle my life, instead of the other way around? I roared. Layla dropped a plate, taken aback by my outburst, but I was far too incensed. Jace, that's the other thing, he sighed. Your temper is out of control, man. You're impossible to work with sometimes. I'm impos, are you kidding me right now? We would have never had that damn contract, all those gigs, even Darren because of me. I'm the damned glue that holds everything together. I knew you'd act like this. I shouldn't have called, but I felt like you deserved a heads up. Wow. Thanks. I disconnected the call, before he could say anything else. I didn't want to hear another word out of his mouth. "Jace, what's wrong?" Concerned, Layla was at my side, and I was shaking with indignation. How dare they? After all the hard work and sweat, they were waiting for an opportunity to drop me. "I've just been dumped from the band," I said with a short, mirthless laugh. I whipped the phone against the floor, and it shattered into pieces. Layla gasped and stepped back. When I saw the mild apprehension in her eyes, I was contrite. "Sorry," I said earnestly, reaching out for her hands. "I shouldn't have done that." A slow expression of relief crossed over her face, and she let me grab her cool palms. "Why? What did they say?" "They're mad I lost the Sony deal." That was a true enough answer. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, and I heard a note of hope in her voice as she stared at me with those wide, guileless eyes. Maybe it was all a sign from the universe. My parents had died right before I got my biggest break. My band was deserting me. And Layla was standing right here in front of me, practically begging me to say the words. What could I do with a 10-year-old kid in LA anyway? It wasn't fair to upset Micah more, to take him away from his home and friends. "Jace, what will you do?" she pressed. I chewed on the inside of my cheek, not wanting to say the words. If I spoke them, they'd be real. I forced a smile onto my face and shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly. "It looks like I'm not going back to LA, I replied. The expression of her beautiful face told me I'd told her precisely what she wanted to hear, but my instinct said I'd made the wrong decision. I wanted Layla, but I also wanted my dream.
Layla.
I was deluding myself, but it was such a good fantasy. I had a perfect life, a man who adored me, and a little boy who admired me. It was too good to be true. I forced myself to ignore the faraway look in Jace's eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. He missed his old life, no matter how comfortable I tried to make things. The Thanksgiving decorations went down, and I was pulling the Christmas ornaments out of the basement one afternoon when Jace startled me. "I'm just going out to get a tree for us," he told me. "I'll be back with a tree shortly." He kissed my forehead and let me go, bounding up the stairs 2 at a time. I didn't move. I was too busy overanalyzing what had happened. The finale was always the same. I was terrified of losing him. Later that same day, a letter came. It was from a law firm and addressed to Jason Jensen. A sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach was growing, and it only got worse when Jace got home and opened it. His jaw tightened, and he shot Micah a look from his seat at the kitchen island. Micah was enchanted with whatever he was watching on TV. "What is it?" Did I want to hear the answer? He grunted and shoved the letter at me. Yeah, I didn't really want to know. I shakily inhaled, a torrent of bad feelings overcoming me. I didn't know Jace had sought out a lawyer to sue the driver who'd killed his parents. "Are you doing this?" I placed the offensive letter on the counter. Jace's gaze was locked on his little brother. "You're thinking about it." Now that I knew him well, his eyes were easy to read. "Micah will be set for life if we win. The man is already facing 20 years in jail for manslaughter, Jace. Taking him and his family for all he's worth won't bring your parents back." His eyes narrowed and he looked at me angrily. "You think I don't know that? It's about the long term here, Layla. The insurance money will take us so far. In case you forgot, I'm unemployed. I'm not making much sitting around Alpena, not working gigs." He probably wanted to add something like wasting my life, but he stopped himself. The pang in my chest was making it difficult to breathe, but I held my ground. There are other ways to earn money than to sue an already tortured man. I'd felt so bad for that driver after I'd learned of Beth and Gary's deaths, and my sentiments hadn't changed. His name was Carl Hinkman. He couldn't even afford the bail to await the trial at home. He was already rotting in jail. What was Jace hoping to accomplish by pursuing this? It was hard to believe money was his only motivator. "That's easy for you to say, isn't it?" he shot back, his biting tone stunning me. You make more money than me right now, and I'm paying you. My jaw locked in place. I can pay my way around here. There was not much conviction in my voice. You're missing the point, he snapped, rising from the counter. What's going to happen now that I'm stuck here in Alpena? There it was, out on the table. He was stuck in Alpena. Whatever we were doing was not good enough for him. Before I could even think of an appropriate response to what he'd said, Jace was gone, leaving me with a hammering heart in my chest. Dad always said my temper reminded him of Jason. Micah slipped into the kitchen. I blinked away the tears that had pooled in my eyes and weakly smiled at him. I never noticed you have a temper. Want a sandwich? I was just about to make one. He nodded. The kid was always hungry a lot. I busied myself at the fridge, willing myself to remain collected. Isn't it weird that you're Jay's girlfriend, but he pays you to cook and clean? I shot him a wary look. So much for keeping Micah in the dark. Who says I'm his girlfriend? You sleep together every night. Aghast, I whirled and stared at him, open-mouthed. I shifted my attention back to the sandwiches. Our relationship is complicated. I can tell. It's nothing like how Mom and Dad were. That made me sad. I hoped to give Micah some impression of normalcy in the wake of his parents' passing, but Jace didn't make it easy. Every relationship is different, I told him gently. Are you guys in love? I was not ready for this conversation with anyone, let alone a 10-year-old. Here's your sandwich. I sat across from him and studied his face. He looks so much like Jace. I wonder if he's going to send all the ladies into a tailspin the same way his brother does. Well, he demanded after taking a bite. Are you? Am I what? I asked innocently, taking my own bite as I was trying to think of an answer that would satisfy him. In love. Are you guys in love? That is a mature topic that should only be discussed between adults. He snorted at the cop-out, but to my relief, didn't push the issue. I was supremely grateful he didn't, because I didn't know how to tell him that yes, I was desperately in love with Jace, but possibly the sentiment was unrequited.
Jace.
Our little tiff about the lawsuit blew over, but I couldn't get Layla's words out of my head. So what if Carl Hinkman was in his own personal hell? He deserved that and so much more for what he did. Jail time was not enough for taking our parents from us, no matter how Layla felt. At the same time, any settlement that would impact his family bothered me deeply. It wasn't his wife's fault that he was a piece of shit who had gotten behind the wheel drunk. It wasn't his unborn grandkid's fault that he was a careless jerk. In the end, I dropped the suit quietly, much to my lawyer's chagrin. I didn't tell Layla, almost like she'd say, "Told you so," even though she wouldn't. A part of me always waited for the other shoe to drop, like it had with Teresa sleeping with Miguel. But Layla wasn't Teresa. She wouldn't rub anything in my face. So why was it so difficult to let her in? That was going through my head as I shopped for her Christmas present. The obnoxious sound of bells accented the carols piping through the mall's speakers. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders that the big day was only 3 days away. Finding a present for Layla was more difficult than I supposed. Heck, even Darren had been a piece of cake. I'd gotten her a gift certificate to a spa. It was sort of a peace offering for what had happened with Sony. I hadn't spoken to her for a while. Time had given me a perspective on the matter. I couldn't really fault the guys for wanting to branch out when my own plans were so uncertain. I assumed Darren was on board with them, but in my pit of depression, I'd never followed up on it. Without the band, the brand we'd worked so hard to market was nothing with me alone. Or maybe that's what I kept telling myself. It was easier than thinking about starting over at the bottom and clawing my way up again. I wasn't 21 anymore. The thought of what could have been was pushed aside as I stopped in front of a jewelry store to look at the display. Buying jewelry was tricky. I wanted to get Layla something to show how much I appreciated everything she had done for us, but did I want her to think I was somehow solidifying our future together? And why the hell not? Why not have a future with Layla? The only reason I could think was that we were polar opposites. She deserved a man who was as good and wholesome like her, not a washed-out singer who couldn't keep his band together. My cell rang, shattering my self-deprecation. I grabbed it from the carrier on my waist. It was Darren. "Merry ho-ho," she chirped in my ear. "How's daddyhood? I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I guess you got my gift?" "I did, and it's funny it came today because I was going to call you anyway." "Great minds, right? How are things in Tinseltown?" "I'm up to 5 Xanax and 7 Ritalin a day, so basically normal." "Are you coming home?" I snorted, thinking she was joking. "So, are you representing the guys now? Did they find another vocalist?" "You're kidding, right?" Darren scoffed. "When those idiots told me their plan, I laughed them right out of my office. You are and have always been the heart and soul of Rune. There is no band without you, and I told them as much." My heart swelled at her words, but I kept my voice neutral. She was an agent. Lying was second nature to her. If what she was saying was true, why hadn't she called me? Maybe she'd tried representing Rune without me, and it hadn't gone well. "Well, it's nice to know you have my back. Honey, I've been working real hard to get everything in order for the last month. That's why I've been off the radar, although I thought you'd given up on the life, until I got your gift." "Get what in order?" I ventured away from the window and moved toward a bench, flopping onto it as Darren continued trilling in my ear. "Sony, of course. Your meeting with Sony." "I messed everything with Sony." Darren barked out a laugh that reminded me of a chihuahua. "You're kidding, right? You thought it was over because you didn't show to the meeting." Yeah," I replied slowly. "When you stand up a huge corporation, they usually don't give you another chance." Darren howled. "Oh honey," she chortled. "Either you've been watching too many movies, or you really don't know the industry. Sony gets stood up 60 times a day. That's what happens when you're working with artists. But they are in the business of making money, Jace." "We're having another meeting." I bolted upright, my mouth gaping. "You thought they wouldn't? It was just a matter of when. I have you scheduled in the day after the New Year's. Can you make it back January 2nd? I was speechless. "Jace? Are you still there? Gosh, I hate Samsung. Jace. Jace. I'm here. I uttered before she busted my eardrum. "Yeah, I'll go back. What about the rest of the band?" "The hell with them. They want you, Jace. Those fools made a big mistake dropping you. It's your voice. Do you want to call them, or should I?" Again, I didn't know what to say. "Fine," Darren sighed. "You can tell them. Do it on Skype and record it so I can see their stupid faces, all right?" "Okay. I gotta go, babe. Chandra Dillian is here, giving me stink because she thinks she owns my ass." "All right." The call dropped and I stared at the cell in my hands, shaking my head. I wasn't dead in the water. I still had a meeting with Sony. All the excitement was greatly diminished by the thought of telling Layla and Micah. Because if this panned out, undoubtedly, I'd go back to LA, indefinitely. Christmas morning found the three of us downstairs around the brightly lit tree in our pajamas, drinking hot chocolate and snapping pictures. It was a difficult day for my brother, but he didn't display his emotions. He was so much like me. Like our dad. Layla gave me a thick, dark red velour robe, a color she liked me in. She never said it, but her eyes lit up every time I wore cherry or burgundy. Micah gave me a watch. It wasn't expensive, but he had it engraved with my initials. We weren't snuggling yet or wrestling, but we were making progress. He certainly didn't seem to hate me as much as he had when I first came back home. Was I setting everything back by accepting this meeting? Micah seemed happy with his gifts, a bike and some video games. I saved Layla's gift for last. When she opened it, her face tinged pink and her head whipped up. "Oh my gosh, Jace," she choked. "This must have cost you a fortune." It was worth it, just to see her eyes sparkling against the diamonds as she held them up to her flushed neck. "May I?" She scooted closer, sliding between my legs as I clasped the necklace around her neck. "Fancy. Now you'll have to take her out somewhere for once," Micah cracked. "Mind your business," I snapped, but I realized he was right. We hadn't even been on a real date yet. Any time we went out, Micah was always in tow. "We'll have many dates in LA. Much better places to go there than here." That was my cue. I cleared my throat as Layla sat back, trailing over her present in awe. "I got some news a few days ago." "Good news." They both looked at me expectantly. I shouldn't have said anything at all, but how much longer could I put it off? I was scheduled back in LA in a week, and from there, things would move very quickly. My house there was vacant, although a neighbor checked on things. It would comfortably house the three of us. But what about this house? Selling it was a painful idea. Our parents had loved this house. They'd bequeathed it to me, hoping I would leave it for Micah. "Well, don't keep us in suspense," Layla implored me. "What's your news?" "I spoke to Darren, and—" "Who's Darren?" Micah interrupted. I realized neither of them knew my agent. She'd been at the funeral, but I hadn't introduced them. "She's my agent in LA. The light faded from both of their faces in unison. "Oh." I wasn't sure which one said it, but the sentiment extended to both of them. "And," I rushed on before I lost my nerve, "it turns out I still have a meeting with Sony. I need to be back in LA on the 2nd. "Meeting for what?" Micah asked. Layla turned her head away. "I have a record deal lined up. The meeting was supposed to happen already, but—" I stopped speaking, not wanting to bring up my parents. "So what does this mean?" Micah demanded. He could already tell what it meant. "It means, little brother, that I'm getting my dream at last." Layla made a sound. Micah jumped to his feet, furious. "You're going back to LA," he yelled. "That's what you mean." Well, yeah, Micah, it means—" "I knew you would leave again." Micah screamed, tears flooding his eyes. "I knew it." He bolted from the room, before I could explain the situation. I started after him, but Layla stopped me. "Let me." Her voice was tight and irritated. "I'm not leaving him. You are both coming with me, obviously." She looked at me in disbelief. "Obviously?" she asked skeptically. "Obviously we're coming with you?" I felt like a steel rod had gotten jammed down my spine. "Yes. Obviously my brother is going with me, and I assumed—" "You assumed I would pack up and follow you across the country, without even knowing what you want from me." The anger bubbling from her was uncharacteristic of the woman I'd known over the last month. "Layla, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. I thought my chance was lost, but it's knocking again, at Christmas no less." She couldn't muster the words, and instead spun and disappeared after Micah. I gritted my teeth, tempted to follow them and make them listen, but really what else could I say? Micah, I understood. He was a kid. He didn't know another life besides Alpina. But Layla. She should be on my side. I slumped back onto the couch and stared blankly to the front yard. Snow started falling, and I was transfixed by the neighbors' flashing lights across the street. Christmas in LA was nothing like this. It was warm, and bikini-clad men and women skated by on rollerblades. There was no melancholy, no sense of loss. What had I been doing involving Layla in my convoluted life in the first place? She was a simple girl with plain values. She and I were star-crossed, doomed, but I'd followed my heart and it had landed me on yet another person's hate list. A part of me hoped she would refuse to come. It might lead to more problems. If this was how it was going to be after a month, what would it be like after a year? But that doesn't mean I want to let her go. The matter was solely in Layla's hands now. I could only sit back and wait for her decision, but I made one of my own in the meantime. Whether or not Layla decided to come with us, I was going back to California.
Layla. 1 year later.
Ryan was blasting one of Jace Joyce's singles through the stereo speakers in the living room. "Turn that shit off right now," I howled. My entire family looked at me in alarm, but my brother hurried to oblige. No one wanted to rouse my temper, not after the last few months. "It's not exactly Christmas music, is it?" Why did I feel the need to explain myself to them? My sentiments about Jace and how we had left things had been made quite clear. Or rather, how he'd left me and taken my little friend with him. For a year, I'd been trying to make sense of how easy it had been for him to leave, like what we'd shared had meant nothing to him. Sure, he'd asked me to come, but as an afterthought. I had not been involved in his decision. He'd expected me to follow him like a puppy. Why didn't I go? It was a question I still couldn't answer. How many times had I picked up the phone to call him, or opened my email to fire him a long, scathing message? I never had, nor had I responded to his endless messages. That had been earlier, though. Jace hadn't messaged in months, not since his voice had taken over the airways. I couldn't go anywhere without hearing him, and it was maddening. "Have something to eat, dear," Mom urged, shoving a hamburger in my face. I accepted and dug in. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something hot. "I hear H&M is hiring, Layla," Dad offered from the grill. It pained him to make the suggestion, but he knew I needed a job. And he wanted to get me out of the house, even though Mom insisted she was happy. "Retail. That sounds swell." "It's not too late to go back to school," Morris offered. I gave him the finger. "Layla," my mother barked at me. I ignored her and focused on the burger again. I'd thought she was used to it by now. Everyone else seemed to accept my personality change, for better or worse. Mom regretted not putting up a bigger fight when I'd taken that job with the Jensens. I knew he'd be a terrible influence, she'd said more times than I cared to count. I just knew it. "This is my entire fault." "I'm a grown woman, Mom," I'd reminded her just as often. "I can make my own decisions." "Can you?" was invariably the answer. "The Jensen house is up for sale," Kat said, and my head whipped around. "What?" My sister nodded solemnly. I bit my tongue to keep myself from screaming. "There's a for sale sign, and Kendall Reynolds is the realtor. He's selling it remotely from LA. He hasn't even come by after the tenants moved out last month." No, Jace hadn't returned, not to my knowledge anyway. What a jerk. Again, my family exchanged nervous looks. He was selling Mika's house. Just when I'd thought I couldn't hate him more. I closed my eyes and thought about the kid I'd loved as much as his brother, and wondered how he was doing. What Jace did wasn't fair to either of us, and I'll never forgive him. Never. "He'll have to come back to Alpena for the final inspection and to sign the paperwork when it sells," Kat commented, and I zoned back in. She was saying it for my benefit. I guess so. I bet he'll expect a parade when he lands in his Sony-sponsored jet. "Layla, when he comes you should," my mom began, but the ire in my face stopped her. She cleared her throat and looked toward Dad, who was still working at the kitchen grill. "Or not," she stated. "Maybe you can bring him a pie. That always works out well." "Hey," Dad growled, frowning at me. "Just because you weren't savvy enough to stay away from a guy everyone knew was bad news, doesn't mean it's your mother's fault." I inhaled sharply, contrition filling my lungs. "I know. I'm sorry, Mom." At once, her arms were around my shoulders and she hugged me closely. "You regret not going to LA with him and Micah, honey, but think about the life you'd have now. Think about the—" "Mom, please. I don't want to rehash all this. My decision was best for everyone, no matter how hard it might be, and no matter how you and Dad question me." "We don't question you," my parents chorused in harmony. My siblings and I laughed. I picked up the remnants of my burger and continued to chomp. Anyway, Kat concluded, you should be on the lookout in case he comes to town. Kendall promised to text me if she hears he's coming. I nodded, chewing slowly. The bread started to taste like sawdust. The eyes of my entire family were on me, but I didn't meet anyone's gaze. I didn't want to engage in more banter on the matter. They wouldn't go against my wishes and contact Jace behind my back, but that didn't mean they agreed with my choice to cut him out, not when there was a kid involved. Oh. I sat up as I heard a noise, but my mom put her hand on my arm. I got this. Finish eating. I smiled at her gratefully and dropped into my chair, but instinctively my ears were trained on the rest of the house. The doorbell rang and we curiously gazed at each other. Is Santa early? Dad joked, moving to the door, but Morris stopped him. I'll get it, old man. Finish the burgers. Dad laughed and whipped my brother with a tea towel as Morris scurried to answer as the bell chimed again. Impatient, I remarked. It's flipping cold outside, Layla, Kat chided me. I'd be impatient too in 3 feet of snow. I bet it's not snowing in California. I had been thinking about Jace a lot more since Thanksgiving. It marked the anniversary of the time we'd spent together. I was playing a lot of the what-if game. What if Darren hadn't called? What if I'd gone with them? What if I'd never slept with him? It was the dumbest game a person can play. There were no winners and it only drove you closer to the brink, particularly when you already didn't get enough sleep. Ali. Morris reappeared in the doorway of the kitchen, looking petrified. All eyes were on him. What? You have a visitor. Is it Melanie? Get rid of her, please. I begged him in a stage whisper. I can't buy any more Avon from her. He shook his head, his eyes huge. Suddenly my stomach lurched and I was on my feet. No. I said slowly. It can't be. It's not Jace, he assured me. Well? It's his brother, Micah. Instantly the stress was back. I ran out of the kitchen, my family in tow. Micah. He was standing in the foyer. He looked great, a lot taller, and wearing a designer coat with a faux fur lining. At least Jace is taking care of him. I was filled with guilt. Jace loved his brother. That was never the matter. There were just other issues. Hey, Layla. He looked at me shyly, and I rushed forward to embrace him heartily. He seemed surprised by my reaction, but hugged me back tentatively while looking at my family watching us from the hallway. Ignore them, I chirped, glancing nervously toward the stairs for a sign of my mother. They don't get out much and forget what other people look like. It's really great to see you. Sorry I stopped by without calling or emailing, but my brother keeps a good eye on me and said not to bother you when I asked if we could visit. The smile froze on my face. Yeah. Make me into the bad guy. That's nice. Typical Jace BS. You never bothered me, sweetheart. It seemed like he wanted to be invited in, but I couldn't take the risk. Listen, Micah, I would love to catch up with you, but we're going out, to a family thing. Could we catch up tomorrow? How long will you be in town? Until tomorrow night. Jace needs to be back in the studio Friday morning. I heard the sob, but as I turned my head, my mother was already speaking. Sorry, Layla. I tried to calm her, but baby wants her mama. It was only then that Mom saw Micah and clamped her mouth shut as my daughter continued to wail in her arms. Mika's face turned pale and he looked at me, astounded. Why you have a baby? He inquired. I wish the floor would open and swallow me. Yes. What else could I say? Was Micah mature enough to understand my infant daughter was his niece? Mom dropped Charlotte into my arms and I began rocking her gently. Oh, he peered into Charlotte's small face and a tender smile formed on his lips. She's cute. I didn't know you got married. There it was. I took it and ran. Yep, I lied. I got married and I had a baby. My family exhaled collectively behind me. But we can talk about it tomorrow. He nodded. Café crepe on Sanford? I suggested. Around noon? That was Charlotte's nap time. He nodded and gave her a long gaze that made my heart skip. Charlotte resembled the Jensen men so much, it was impossible to ignore the thick dark hair and big brown eyes. But Micah couldn't know, could he? See you tomorrow, he replied, retreating to the snow. Hang on, Micah, Morris called. I'll give you a ride. He shook his head. No, I don't want Jace to see you, he replied. Good night. I fell against the door, bundling my daughter in my arms. Do you think he'll say anything to Jace? Mom asked. By her tone, she hoped he would. Not a chance. He's probably not even speaking to that Jek, I replied, and stalked up the side staircase with mine and Jace's baby.
Jace.
Mari was smoking a cigarette on the patio when I drove up. I grimaced in frustration. Where's Micah? She shrugged without answering. I pushed my way past her, locking the car with my key fob. Micah was in front of the TV, as usual, and barely looked at me as I entered. He'd acted particularly standoffish since we'd returned from Michigan the day before. Did you have dinner? I had a fairly good idea what the answer was. I had been in the studio all day and was bone-tired. The last thing I wanted was to cook. Not when I was paying Mari. I also paid her for keeping the house. Not like it mattered, she was outside smoking a cigarette. She appeared to be scrolling through her messages. I would have fired her, but she was the third nanny housekeeper since returning to Cali with Micah. Easily, she was the best. The first one had smoked meth, the second had webcammed from my bedroom while Micah was at school. I'd gotten home early one day. Neither of the three interacted with Micah. I began to think we were better off. In good conscience, I couldn't leave my 11-year-old brother alone in L.A. The more time I spent around the women in Los Angeles, the more I missed Layla. But she'd made it clear from the day I left, if I went, we were done. I'd thought that in time she would come around, but she'd ignored my emails, my texts, and my phone calls. A neighbor had said she'd moved back in with Carla, but I didn't dare call there. Carla loathed me, and I wasn't looking to make things worse. The best thing to do was forget about Layla, no matter how badly it burned. Micah didn't answer my question, so I asked again. Are you hungry? Did you eat? No, I haven't eaten, he barked at me. I just said so. I cocked my head to the side, my own temper flaring at his tone, but he'd been acting up since we sold the house. I chalked it up to that, he was pissed at me again. I hadn't wanted to sell it, but I couldn't be a landlord from across the country. My schedule was too grueling, and no one was trustworthy enough to manage it. Actually, that was a lie. I'd trusted Layla, but she'd flatly declined when I'd suggested it. She hadn't even wanted to stay there. She wanted nothing to do with me. Get your jacket. We're going out for dinner. He looked up from his video game with baleful eyes and rose. Of course he did, the kid loved to eat. Mari, we're going out for dinner, I announced as we scooted past her on the porch. Where are you going? She inquired. Can you grab something for me too? I pretended not to hear her as we climbed into my Audi. I was looking at a BMW, but it had to wait until after the tour. Do you want to tell me what's up your ass? I asked in the way of an icebreaker. You ruin everything, he spat, and I was taken aback by its swiftness. Can you be more specific? I knew what was coming. He was angry about the house sale. You didn't deserve Layla anyway. I'm glad she's married now. This weird sensation of both hot and cold swept through me simultaneously, and for a moment I wasn't driving down the road. My brother's lips were moving as he spewed more venom in my direction, but I heard nothing after the opener. Layla is married? He stopped talking and shook his head, looking out the window in disgust. Yeah. And her kid is cute too. That did it. I pulled over on the side of the road so hard that the tires squealed and the car behind me laid on the horn, but I could not have cared less. What did you just say? Yeah, you heard me. I don't think she wants you to know. I hope you're happy. We could have been a family, and you messed it up, Jason. It was surreal, sitting there being cursed at by an 11-year-old. How do you know this? Micah scoffed. How do you think, he snapped, defiantly crossing his arms over his chest. I went to see her at her parents' house. The Butlers? She's staying with her parents? What the hell do you care, Jason? You only give a shit about your music and yourself. He could not have been more wrong. The thought of Layla not only married, but having a child with another man broke my heart into a trillion pieces. It was a punch in the gut, but explain that to a kid whose life had been turned upside down. A burning chafed my eyes. I gritted my teeth and forced myself not cry. So she moved on. I can't even get it up for another woman because no one compares to her, and she's married with children. Who is this jerk she married? It was none of my business, but I had to know. Slamming the car in first, I did a U-turn back toward the house. Where are you going? I thought we were going out to eat. I changed my mind. We're ordering in. Facebook. She hadn't blocked me, but we weren't friends anymore either. Her privacy settings allowed me to see her marital status. Single. That didn't mean a thing. Maybe she hadn't gotten around to it. Maybe she didn't use Facebook anymore. Nah, her last public post had been 3 days ago. The pictures on her profile never had an unfamiliar man, but a few depicted her pregnancy. My mind began to run wild. I spun at the desk and stared at my brother, who was gnawing on his fourth slice of pizza. How old is the baby? He stared at me vacantly. What? Layla's baby. How old is the baby? How would Micah know how old a baby was? He was still basically one himself. Boy or girl? Girl, Micah replied, his mouth full of dough and cheese. Charlotte. What did she look like? Micah's eyes narrowed, as though he didn't quite like where the questions were going. Why do you care? He asked. She's not yours. She better not be mine, I thought, furious at the notion that Layla had gotten pregnant with my seed and had married another man for her daughter to have a name. My daughter. What did she look like? I asked again. She looked like a baby, Micah grumbled. Kinda like me. It was all I needed to hear, and I sprang from the chair. You're staying here with Mari. Oh no way, Jay. Don't go bothering her. She has a life without you. Leave her alone. She's happy. Those words caused me to freeze in my tracks, considering what he'd said. He was right, I had no right to disrupt Layla's happiness, but she also had no right to withhold a child from me, if Charlotte was mine. And what if she isn't? A small, sane voice called at me. Layla wouldn't hide the fact that we had a child, would she? My mind traveled to the day we'd parted, the hurt in her eyes when I'd chosen LA over her. There had been no sugarcoating it. She would not be there to support me along the way. And now I was missing her worse than ever. I have to see her, Micah, I stuttered. How to explain the delicateness of the situation to a kid? You'll do whatever you want anyway, Micah shouted. Just don't get your beat up by her husband. If anyone was home at the Butlers, they weren't answering the door. So I sat on the front steps despite the freezing temperatures, going over everything in my head. You're not here to make trouble. You're here to ask a simple question. If she's not your baby, you can walk away. However, what to do if Charlotte was mine? I couldn't jet set across the country with her in my arms. She was very young and couldn't be separated from her mother. Would I separate them? Would I sue for custody? A sad realization hit me. What the heck was I doing? The Christmas melancholy struck me. Suddenly, I wanted to run away, or at least bury my head in one of the nearby snowbanks. No wonder Layla hadn't told me she was pregnant. She knew me better. I was a fly-by-night, move on a whim guy who wouldn't commit to a loving woman because he was too busy focusing on himself. I didn't deserve to be anyone's father. I couldn't even manage to be a good brother. I rose from the front steps, despair touching my soul. Layla had done the right thing by keeping me away from my daughter, if the child was mine. She'd married someone, given her baby stability, and here I was again trying to wreak havoc. For all I knew, her husband thought the baby is his. Get the hell out of here before someone sees you. It was too late. A minivan pulled into the driveway the second I unlocked my rental. A look of disbelief colored Layla's face from the driver's seat, and I dropped my head in shame. Yup, it was too late. Jace. What are you doing here? She gasped, almost falling out of the vehicle. She was alone, but for the tiny, sleeping infant in a rear-facing car seat directly behind the passenger seat. From where I was standing in the slush, it was impossible to tell how old she was. She could have been 4 months, or she could have been 2. Hi, I said weakly. She looked great. Marriage and motherhood agreed with her. Her pale skin was tinged with pink where the scarf didn't cover her face, and I could see she'd gained some weight, but it filled her perfectly. What are you doing here? There was more firmness in her tone this time. I knew her as well as she knew me. She couldn't hide the fact she was happy to see me, even though uncertainty flashed over her face. Now was the time for the moment of truth. Ask her about Charlotte. She was alone. Would she lie to me? I'd be able to tell. I came to see Charlotte. The words just blurted out and a shadow crossed her face. Micah told you. It wasn't a question. Is she mine, Layla? I won't make any trouble for you or your husband. I understand why you didn't tell me, why you got married so quickly, but I need to know if she's mine. Layla didn't answer, but her chin quivered, despite being so bundled against the cold. She looked away. I'm sorry, I told her, my voice hoarse with emotion. I never meant to hurt you, Layla. I never realized what we had until you were gone. I don't expect you to forgive me. If you and your husband can find a way to let me into her life. I won't make trouble, I swear. I'm not married. To say I felt relief was an understatement. My knees actually buckled, and I stumbled toward her, the sleet catching on the cuffs of my pants. You're not. She shook her head and looked back at the car where Charlotte slept. Your brother assumed that because of the baby, so I played along with it. I didn't want him to run back and tell you. She trailed off, but she didn't have to finish her thought. I knew what she was thinking. Boyfriend? She scoffed. Hell no. Was that declaration an insult or a sign of hope? I opted for the latter. Would you like one? I teased, closing the small gap between us. She peered at me, and my heart skipped a beat. I'm not going to Los Angeles with the baby, she declared. I'm not asking you to. I already made the mistake of letting you go once, Layla, and I'm not doing it again. She gazed at me, pulling the scarf down to expose her face against the cold. You're coming back here? I'll figure something out, I hadn't thought that far ahead. If you let me be in Charlotte's life, and yours. She was still wary, but it appeared she wanted to believe everything I was saying. Layla, I love you. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted in disbelief. Why you do, she choked. I do. From the minute you entered my life. The second I touched down in LA without you, the greatest sense of loss overcame me. When you wouldn't take my calls or emails. I wanted to give you a clean break, she interjected, and I wanted no fight with her. I don't blame you. You did the right thing, you always do the right thing, Layla. Since I met you, I've become a better person. Less hot-headed. Funny, she quipped. Since I've met you, I've become fouler-mouthed and sullen. Just ask my family. She hurried to slide open the van door and deal with the woken child, as I watched in astonishment. She was undeniably mine. The hair, the eyes, the sulky pout, all Jensen traits. Charlotte, Layla cooed gently to the fussing baby once she collected her. Meet your daddy. Layla held her toward me, and a wave of panic struck me. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "She's so small." Layla laughed. "I'm sure. She's tougher than she looks." Eagerly but tentatively, I reached for my baby daughter. Instantly, Charlotte quieted, looking up at me with curious brown eyes. "You're tougher than you look, huh?" I breathed. "Maybe you're like your mommy." My eyes pulled away from the baby long enough to meet Layla's blue eyes. "Thank you," I rasped, my chest full of emotion. "For everything." Layla smiled enigmatically. "It's been more my pleasure than you realize," she replied. "And by the way, I love you too, Jason Jensen." The end.
Epilogue. Jace.
It was freezing when I landed at Alpena Regional Airport, but I barely noticed it, my excitement overwhelming the bitter cold numbing my fingers and toes. I always dressed poorly when traveling. I never got used to the weather changes. It was difficult flying over the equator and across continents while touring. I'd all but given up on figuring things out. "Holy crap!" Micah grunted when I jumped off the private plane. "We're turning into icicles out here. What took you so long?" "Snowstorm outside of New York," I said by way of apology. I grabbed him into my arms and he grunted again, but returned my embrace. He reminded me more and more of myself. His rebellious stage was yet to rear its ugly head, but I could tell it was coming. "Hurry up. It's Christmas Eve and I have plans with friends." "You have friends?" I joked, slipping into the waiting Jeep. Charlotte gargled at me from her car seat, waving her small fist in the air. "Hello, my love, did you miss your daddy?" "Ahem," Layla called from the driver's seat. "I missed her daddy." "Oh," I said with faux surprise. "I didn't see you there." "Hello, wife." I leaned forward to plant a deep kiss on Layla's mouth, and Micah groaned. "Come on. Can't you save it for the house?" he muttered. "It's funny you should mention that," I said nonchalantly. "I have a surprise for you." "It better be good if you dragged me all the way out here on Christmas Eve." Micah grumbled. "I wonder if I was this miserable when I was 13, I said to Layla. "You were that miserable when you were 30, my wife offered. "I imagine you were worse at 13. Micah whooped, and they shared a high five from the front seat before Layla started driving. It was my own fault, really. I should never have sent Micah to live with Layla in between tours. I'd kept my house in LA, but unless I was chained to the studio, I spent all my spare time in Alpena with my family. I'd rented a 5-bedroom house for us, but that was temporary. "I just sent GPS coordinates to your phone," I told Layla. "Follow them." "No." Micah protested. "Where are we going now?" "Stop your whining," I snapped. "You'll see when we get there. You will eat your ungrateful words." "Not likely," was my brother's response, but 10 minutes later his attitude changed dramatically. Awe shone not only on his face but on Layla's as she steered the car up a long, lonely road. Out of the blue, 1,000 small lights dazzled against the snow. "What is this place?" Layla asked, and even Charlotte was leaning forward in her car seat to take in the display of lights against the evergreens. "This," I replied, gesturing toward the sprawling mansion tastefully decorated for the holidays, "is our new home." Layla stopped driving long enough to turn and look at me. "What?" "It has 2 pools, 1 indoor, 1 outdoor, a sauna, 2 hot tubs, gym, library, 12 bedrooms. 12 bedrooms. Micah choked. "Why do you need a dozen bedrooms?" "For a dozen kids, maybe," I suggested lightly, meeting Layla's eyes. "Santa." Charlotte gurgled, pointing out the window, and indeed there was a life-sized Santa near the front entrance. The columns were colonial style, entwined in lights, and when Layla stopped, the front door opened. A liveried maid and butler opened the door, hurrying toward the car. "What is this, Jace?" Layla demanded again, her eyes huge. "This is our new home. As of today." She didn't understand, so I explained. This place was being built for the last 18 months. I wanted us to have our own family home. Now that I'm not touring, I'll be home for at least 6 months. No recording, only spending quality time with my family. Seriously? Micah quizzed. It's ours? Yes. We're spending this Christmas in our new home. Micah was too excited to remain in the car, but Layla couldn't stop looking at me, her eyes gleaming with happiness. You moved back, she whispered. Put down your roots. Alpena is your home. I nodded and shrugged, grinning. I guess. But truthfully, Layla, anywhere I'm with you, Charlotte, and Micah is my home. Her smile widened, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. I love you, she asserted. I love you back. She nodded toward the house. Let's get in there and make some babies to fill up those rooms. Yes, ma'am. After all, who was I to argue with the boss?
The end. Thank you for listening to this audiobook. Audio copyright 2023 BFA Publishing. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. It helps more than you know.